Okay, hello everybody. Thank you so much for coming. It's 7:15, so I think we'll get started. I just want to welcome everyone to the Sustainable Communities panel this evening. I'm Councillor Natasha Ryan, your chair. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We're not expecting a fire drill today, so if the alarm goes off, please do make your way out of the building. And we will be filming, so if you don't wish to be filmed, please let us know and we'll leave you outside of the view of the camera. And as customary, because this is the beginning of our meeting tonight, it's customary for me to set our expectations of each other. So to panel members, please be respectful of each other. Anyone presenting or speaking tonight, we are here to be critical friends to the council, not recreate Game of Thrones. Anyone observing our meeting, thank you for taking the time to play your part in our local democracy. But please do not interrupt in any way and be respectful of members, guests and speakers. In return, I will do my best to be respectful of you, your contribution and your time. So, without further ado, we will crack on. There's one apology for absence, that's Councillor Butler, and we've got Councillor Fraser subbing. Any declarations of pecuniary interest? And minutes of the previous meeting. Can panel confirm that these were true and accurate record of the previous meeting? Yeah. Any matters arising? Okay, so we'll move on to agenda item 4, which is Cabinet Member Priorities. So we have Cabinet Members Councillor Caroline Cooper-Mabea for Commerce, Leisure and Culture. We've got Tobin Byers, our Cabinet Member for Adult Social Care, Health and Environment, and Councillor Martin Walton, Cabinet Member for Regeneration, Housing and Transport. So each member will say their priorities and then we'll go to the panel for some brief questions. So first of all, Councillor Cooper-Mabea.
Thank you very much, Chair. I know you said before. Oh, sorry. Thank you very much, Chair. I know you said I have 5 minutes to speak, so I've got a few points here that I want to make. So on the library, we want to continue to expand the breadth of services that we offer to include online inquiry support and to increase collaborative working with other services to become a one-stop shop for the council in terms of supporting residents with certain services on offer. And in fact, this autumn we will be launching our own customer app so that residents will be able to download e-books and magazines, etc. And for the Heritage Center, the Heritage Center sits within the library service, if those who are not sure. And this year we are celebrating its 25th anniversary. And there have been several events happening at the center, so feel free to go in there if you like. But we're trying to also improve services for people, in fact to include services for people with learning disabilities, so special educational needs, and also we want to make the space a dementia-friendly space for everyone to be able to enjoy the library services that we offer. And for green spaces, we continue to review and refine issues in relation to the delivery and performance of ID Verde, so the ground maintenance contract basically. And we want to improve information and awareness of the green spaces on service on the council's website and other social media to make people more aware of our green spaces and to encourage them to use our spaces. And we want to increase our income from our parks through events and property portfolio, and mainly the pavilion that we have there, and underutilized rooms and spaces that we have in our green spaces. For Wimbledon Park, we have the lake project, and we are working to carry out the council's statutory duty on the safety of the reservoir, and this work has to be completed by January 2022. So that's a big area of our focus at the moment. And also we have an open water swimming project. So we've had an open water swimming group that approached the council because they want to use the lake for swimming. And so the officers, especially Chris Pastor, are gathering information at the moment so that a decision can be made about that. And we're hoping that a decision will be made probably next year. And we also have the London Borough of Culture and the film Merton, and we want to make a great success of this film Merton. And we have community films going on currently, and I think councillors have been sent information about this, and it's also been widely publicized on the council website. We have 4 films being produced in Merton, 2 by emerging professional filmmakers and 2 by young filmmakers. And we will have a virtual reality and film festival taking place in the spring of next year. So, in brief, that's what I want to say.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the panel?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Cooper-Marbella. I have a question about the parks. You mentioned you want to do more events in the parks, but we've recently had an interesting one that wasn't well received by lots of locals. How does that square with having more events and trying to meet the aspirations of local residents?
I think the event that happened last month, we're still trying to investigate what happened, but I think the police are dealing with the stabbing, because I think when I look at the preliminary information that we have, comparing what happened this year to what happened previously in terms of noise and littering, we think that things were a little bit better, was better than previous years. But again, I say it's preliminary, so we have to wait for the final result to come through. In terms of the stabbing, the police are dealing with that, and we have to wait until they do the investigation and then come back to us. But I think with any event, we have to make sure that safety is paramount, and we have to check and make sure that we're doing everything we can do to make sure that our residents and also and party goers are safe, because the park is there to be used, and whilst I encourage people to go to the park, have picnic, exercise, but I think also people who want to go to the park and it's an open space, and people want to use it for that sort of activity. And I think it's a big enough space for everyone to be able to use. But we don't know when we talk about moving forward. We have to wait for the results to come before we can make a decision.
Councillor Baker?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the Cabinet Member for her report. I note that you say that you want to review and refine the contract with the major open spaces contractor, ID Verdi. I wondered if you might talk us through your view on the process for reporting problems with land managed by ID Verdi, not just open spaces, but the other areas of land like grass verges and the like that don't fall within the earlier contract.
Well, I think you're going deeper, you're probably going deeper into, I don't know whether that's in my area now, I'm going to talking about, because I don't know whether,
Yes.
Sorry?
It is.
Well, in terms of reviewing the contract, we look to see whether they are doing what they are asked to do, and how, for example, when we report, when residents report, we check to see how fast they are responding and how well they are doing the work. And we get back to them. I think it's about making sure, taking them to task, basically, and making sure that they do what we are asking them to do. And we're not going to let them get away with it. And I know they're probably not getting it right the first time, but we have to be persistent and make sure that we take them to task.
Thank you. I'm pleased to hear that we're not going to let them get away with it. I think my point was more the process that the ordinary resident has for reporting problems. they're expected to know that a bit of land, whether the owner is responsible or whether Idinverdi is responsible, and I wondered if you might look into, along with colleagues in waste services, a sort of joined up one-stop shop for reporting problems so that the resident doesn't have to be an expert in who manages what piece of land.
Okay, thank you, I'll take that.
Okay, I'll go to Councillor Stafford and then Councillor Mundy.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Caroline, for your report. It's on the same issue with Idinverdi to a certain extent. On the other hand, it's regarding the events that are held on our open spaces, and I do understand the issue that you need to optimise income for sites around the borough. But I've had an awful lot of problem in the past couple of years since they took over managing events, with inappropriate events being put on Figs Marsh open space. Figs Marsh open space is not the same as Morden Park, Morden Hall Park, other large areas. And it just cannot, it is very, very, very close to residents. In fact, residents actually, their front doors open onto the Figs Marsh open space. So to have to put up with noisy, crowded events is just, it's just getting beyond a joke now, and I've made complaints over the past couple of years about it. Chris will understand what I'm on about, because it is just becoming ridiculous now. So I'd like you to find out exactly what Idinverdi are, what checks they are making, whether the sites they are using for certain events are appropriate, please.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Mundy and then Councillor Dean.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Caroline, for that presentation. It was really exciting to hear about the potential of an app to expand the library's digital offering. Could you just expand upon that a bit further, and also be interested to hear how it will build upon sort of best practice that the government digital service outline, how it would support child safeguarding especially, but also how it would support our nurseries trying to reach early years foundation status, and perhaps touch on if this is a wider push in council to develop our digital services and other offerings to mobile.
Well, I think with the app, my understanding is that we're starting in autumn and we'll build on it, but I'm not sure how, what services will be added onto it. But we're starting with, for example, now you can download e-books, you can download e-magazines, but they are all separate. If you now have the app, you can do all in one place. There will be other things as well, but the idea is to be able to do everything in one place, make it a bit easier, and with time we can build on that. So with time we can build on that so that So yes, with time we'll be able to build on the app to widen what it can be used for.
Councillor Manchester, follow-ups.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, so my son Sam has the unique ability on YouTube to keep scrolling to videos and ends up going to my sort of Star Wars videos and things like that. I've been watching on there. So how do we ensure that? How do we? What is this YouTube? How do we ensure that the app itself, if you're making it child friendly, how to make sure that advertisers don't advertise to children, as particularly on sites like YouTube and things like that?
Okay, I'll take that up and I'll look into it to make sure that people, I'm not sure whether people will be able to advertise on it or not, but I can find that out.
Councillor Dean.
The first question is a very broad one, and it's probably not for you to answer because it goes back a number of years, but when the council initially said that they were looking to contract out the park service, many of the friends groups of the parks were asking for a kind of job description for the contractor, and they were told that a lot of this would be commercially confidential, but they didn't believe, on the basis that a lot of the parks friends groups do an immense amount of work for a number of parks around the borough, they didn't believe that that was necessary. And they are still talking to me about the fact that they don't have a specific plan per park. So that when they go into Donald Rec, which is in my ward, and other places, they can't be sure if ID Verdi are doing the job or not, because they've never been given the paperwork, they've never been given the description of the work that they do. So what I would ask is that there is a plan for each park, because clearly ID Verdi must have one. They must have in their contract with the council or with whoever runs the ID Verdi contract, there must be a service level agreement. So, and I would imagine that must be specific per park, because it's the obvious that some parks have lakes and some don't. So it won't be clear the lakes, it will be do this, then buy who. So that's really a statement more than anything. I'm not expecting you to answer that because it's a relatively onerous task. But we would want to start seeing that, and then we can hold ID Verdi to account when the people give the information. The second question is more specific. Tennis. So a group of Americans came over here and were surprised they had to pay for tennis in the parks on the basis if you go to America it's free. You can play anywhere you like in New York. And they said, how is it that the All England Lawn Tennis seem to tell everybody that Wimbledon is open for tennis unless you live here? So could you take back to the council and to All England that it shouldn't cost £8 an hour to play tennis here, especially when you can go to a private club and play for £1 an hour. The council, the government, the monopoly is the most expensive way you can play tennis in this borough. And I would like to take back that we should be getting our tennis for free on the basis of everything that this borough does for tennis in this country. I'm not sure that's a question either.
Well, thank you very much for that. I will take that back. Like I said, since I started and all the conversations I've had around tennis, I do appreciate that we have top-class tennis in this borough, and we have, if you want to make sure that everyone partake in the pitch, we have good courts for people to play on. You can't then also say it should be free. It's a bit difficult. And actually, I know we say £8 per hour, but tennis, you don't play tennis on your own. You either play double. It's either 2 or 4 people playing. So when you look at it that way, it's either £4 an hour per person or £2 an hour per person. So it's not £8 specifically for an individual. And so, with that fee, I think, and with the system also, because it costs money to be able to put that system in place, which will ensure that people who want to play can book and go there, and the court will be available. No one else will be there hawking it. And after your 1 hour or 2 hours you play, the next person can move on and play. So I think it makes it more accessible for others as well.
I think we're going to have to draw things to a close because we've got 2 other cabinet members who want to ask. But I just want to say for ID Verdi, they're coming to us in March. So I was wondering if we can ask for a per park plan to come to panel for then. We've given that with plenty of notice for them to come together.
Can we ask for total cost to subsidise tennis free across the borough as well? An idea of what that would be financially, because it is actually rarely, but I do agree with Councillor Dean that this is the home of tennis.
Every day.
This is the home of tennis, and it seems odd that.
I don't disagree. And I think, yes, let's find out how much it would cost to subsidise this.
Ask
But
how
you're
much
asking
revenue.
for, you're
Ask how much
asking,
revenue there's coming in.
but you're asking for the All in England to contribute to that. Was that what you
Well,
were
let's look at the analysis.
Yeah.
My view
Okay.
is that if you look at the revenue, it will
Yeah.
be very low, and I think that they should be doing a lot more. And truly, I play at a local private club because it's cheaper to play
Okay.
there. It's £1 an hour plus. I'm not a friend, plum man. There's a brick wall there.
That's squash, please. That's squash.
Okay, no, thank you very much. We'll do that. We'll do that. So,
Sorry, Chair, can I just say we do have tennis for free in few of the courts here as well. I just want to throw that in.
okay, so let's. Council Holder's going to finish with the last point, and we'll move on to the next cabinet member. Otherwise, we'll be doing this for a very long time.
Yeah, thank you. You mentioned about Wimbledon Park Lake and the dam projects. Can you sort of outline how you make sure you're getting enough funding for that? Because it can be quite an expensive endeavour to go around fixing dams at lakes. And is council going to get any recourse or any funds from other users such as?
Sorry, I didn't get
So-
any funds.
Get any funds from the All England or the London Club? Because there are other users around the lake which will just outcost.
I don't know yet, but I know we're still looking into the works and what needs to be done and how it be done and all of that. And I'm also aware that we have about 1.39 million. And so, but we don't know what the total cost will be, and so we have that basis, and then we see what we need to do to progress.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Cooper. Okay, is that working? That's bizarre. Maybe there's some kind of ghost in the system or something. So we'll move on to Councillor Byers. If you, oh no, Councillor Walton wants to go first. Okay, we'll go to Councillor Walton next. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to speak, and also welcome you as the Chair of this panel as well. In terms of my own portfolio priorities, there's many things happening within it at the moment. One of my top priorities is in terms of modern regeneration. Now, obviously, I have been here before. The market has been a challenge over the last year. The uncertainty out there in terms of Brexit has had an impact. I think when we know one way or another where we're heading, it will help, but we are looking at going to the market in the spring, and we're also looking at securing funding from the GLA in terms of land acquisition within the town centre. We have met with many developers who have expressed an interest in working with the local authority. Earlier today I met with a developer, one of the big housing providers, who certainly were interested in actually putting forward an interest in the development. I think in that development it's engaging with the wider community as well. We've obviously extensively undertaken that at the moment, but delivering 2,000 new homes, but also as well the look and feel of the area, transport in the town centre, leisure, retail, whilst recognising it's a changing market. I think Morden has very many benefits in terms of the surrounding open space. We're privileged to have Morden Hall Park, but also as well good communication links in terms of being at the end of the line. Now, part of the regeneration will also involve part of the estate, which may well involve an estate ballot. So that is likely to happen over the next few years, which is partly conditional on GLA funding, and obviously has been introduced by the Mayor of London. There's also as well, in terms of housing is one of my top priorities. I know we've discussed before in terms of improving housing conditions in the private rented sector. I was pleased last month we had a successful prosecution. We've also got one in court next week as well. Cabinet agreed back in June to introduce civil penalties. There's also a new requirement in terms of licensing in terms of 5 and over, and we're looking at introducing a selective licensing scheme as well in parts of the borough. So when we have that scheme ready to go, I very obviously welcome scrutiny from this panel, because it's important in terms of dealing with environmental issues, antisocial behaviour, but also as well in terms of the condition of housing within wards as well. We're also bringing forward a housing strategy. This is the first housing strategy we've had for 7 years, which is going to involve working with a number of key partners, but also as well in terms of identifying need and how we can provide more generally affordable homes in this borough. I think we recognise there's huge challenges in terms of living here, the cost of living, but also as well in terms of people accessing the housing market. We do need to build more homes. We have been set very challenging targets by the Mayor of London. 1,400 homes. I think obviously the target is high, but I think in terms of that there needs to be flexibility in terms of some of the developments within the borough, because we have that demand, we have that growing population, but providing that homes, but also ensuring that they are of a high quality and a design specification, but also as well in terms of meeting housing needs. We have the regeneration has started on Ravensbury. The first stage is about to get underway in Hyde Park, and the next stages are now going in to the planning committee. This is obviously a £1.2 billion regeneration, which will be over the next 10 years. It's Clarion's biggest investment in the whole country. Clearly in that process, there's obviously it's engaging continually with residents, but also ensure that those regeneration delivers for local residents living in those areas as well. I think it's something I welcome as cabinet member, because in many of those areas we do have issues in relation to overcrowding, but also as well in terms of need. So going forward, as we go through the different stages, developing more affordable homes, and hopefully more will actually be delivered as a result of the region, but also as well across the borough. Very much welcome the additional funding from the Mayor of London in getting as many affordable homes to build, but genuinely affordable homes, and that includes social homes for rent. I suppose the one thing that's frustrating as being a cabinet member is that many of my colleagues in other boroughs have got money in terms of building council housing, and obviously as we don't have a housing revenue account, we can't build those council homes, but it's accessing those money and working with those registered providers, so we are having that ongoing dialogue. So that's just a taste of my portfolio. Clearly there's many other issues and I could talk for a lot longer. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Holden would like to ask a question, and then Councillor Richard.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. One aspect of your role is about transport. I was just wondering if there's any particular transport-related things you want to touch on in your portfolio, and anything in particular in any parts of the borough. If you can briefly outline those, that would be good.
I think obviously in transport is Crossrail 2 it's still in abeyance. It's been frustrating that things have been held up for a few years because it's desperately needed. I think it's a scheme that will have huge economic benefits to the borough, but also as well in terms of Wimbledon, and actually providing the much needed additional capacity as well. We also as well work closely with TfL, and one of the things we did recently was obviously write a letter in relation to bus services, calling obviously for more hybrid bus services. Hopefully we will see more electric, because we do want cleaner air within Merton. The other aspects of transport, clearly Tramlink and the extension to Sutton. We've had the consultations on that. I think personally I would obviously like to see Tramlink, but clearly there is in terms of how that is actually going to be funded going forward. And also as well in terms of transport services, we would obviously like to see the Mayor taking over rail services, especially in terms of Southern Rail and South West Rail. You might shake your head, but it has had measurable improvements where London Overground have taken over services in parts of London. Obviously many people have to put up with inadequate services from South West trains especially, but also as well in terms of Southern. So we do want to see better transport here in Merton, and we've also awarded you highways contracts.
Thank you so much. So we'll move on to Councillor Pritchard. I'm just going to remind people that we're falling behind schedule a little bit, so if we can keep questions and answers as brief as possible, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. I know how you're working to change the Mayor of London, or his Deputy Mayor's view on the repurposing of Benedict's Wharf, and I've just been up there this afternoon and I totally support the direction you're going. And you stated that housing is a priority. I'm also interested, however, in what you're doing to encourage communities facilities. In the same ward, there's a fire station now that's going to be developed for the sake of 4 or 5 houses, or maybe a couple more than that. And it presents a real opportunity, or presented a real opportunity to have a community facility. And if we don't have those type of cafes, community facilities, we turn these sort of little villages into dormitories. what are we doing to promote those facilities and ensure they still exist within all our wards?
I think firstly in terms of Benedict Wharf, it's a frustration. Obviously, Suez are quite keen to develop this site, 600 homes, and actually get rid of the waste site. And I'm frustrated that it hasn't been redesignated yet, because I think this is an ideal site to actually deliver more housing in the borough, up to 600 housing units delivered on that site. It's it's an excellent site for housing in the right position, and we do need to build more homes simply in this borough. So we've had ongoing dialogue with the Mayor of London, also as well going through in terms of the identification of waste sites, which now obviously the Borough Plan Committee is dealing with. And of course, in terms of any development, it's providing those community facilities as well. But it's all very well building the homes, but it's actually supporting facilities for the people who are going to live there, play facilities, community facilities, arts facilities, obviously providing as well school-based and doctor surgeries. And it's the ongoing supporting infrastructure which I think is actually key, because you can build the homes, but you also as well, that has to be part of a vision. And that's been an integral part obviously in terms of looking at more than, it's not just looking up to 2,000 new homes, it's actually the supporting facilities, and that you actually feel being part of that community, and building that into a planning application as well, and in terms of a master plan for the local area.
Okay, Councillor Baker, and then Councillor Murray.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Martin. I've got three quick questions. Very quick.
Very quick.
Yeah, they're all quick. The first one, you mentioned the housing strategy and the recent prosecution over what I think was a licensing issue rather than a state of housing issue. But Merton's reputation or track record with prosecutions over the state of properties in the private rental sector isn't so good. And I wondered if, as part of the housing strategy, you might look at an information campaign for private sector tenants so they know what their rights are and responsibilities of the local council. Planning representations have been removed from the website. I think these are useful both for councillors and members of the public. We were told that this was over concerns about GDPR. I wondered if you could tell me exactly which aspect of GDPR necessitated this. And lastly, very, very quickly, recently parking strategy was referred back to Cabinet over the qualities impact assessment process. Now, we're very aware that there's a really strict application of the crossovers policy, and we've got feedback from residents, particularly those with disabled family members, that the really strict application of this is difficult for them, and I wondered if you might look at the application of this policy to those with disabilities and other issues.
Thank you, Anthony, for obviously those questions. First of all, in relation to licensing, in relation to prosecutions, yes, there has been a low number. This has been the case in lots of London boroughs where they've had zero or very low numbers, and some of that has actually been down to resourcing issues, because we've obviously lost a third of our budget over the last years, which means that we have less enforcement as a whole. So I think that's one of the benefits of having selective licence scheme. It's obviously bring money in to obviously undertake that as well, but also as well as in terms of the workload involved in undertaking prosecutions. With the introduction obviously of civil penalties, it means that we can actually levy penalties where there is breaches. So there's obviously a range of tools we can use. Obviously I accept that in terms of prosecution, but it's obviously a complex picture as a whole. The next thing is obviously in relation to planning representations being accessed online. In an ideal situation, I would have liked to have kept, we had issues obviously in terms of concerns about GDPR. It's something that has been replicated in other councils in London. Many other councils don't publish planning representations online. Wandsworth doesn't, Sutton doesn't, and there's various other councils as well. Clearly there's concerns if there's any breach, the fines we could be offered, and obviously the advice we have been given by the Information Commissioner on that. Clearly we can look at potentially some way, look at some means going forward, but we do as well know that if there is breaches, GDPR is pretty strict and the advice around it is strict as well. In terms of obviously parking strategy, you're probably obviously well aware in terms of new badge holders, but other holders as well, more now will be entitled to blue badges in the borough, so many of them may well fall into the category as a result of the change that has been made last week, and that will also be replicated when the report comes back to Cabinet next Tuesday. We have taken obviously further consultation following the call-in meeting vote in Scrutiny a few weeks ago, and further information will be provided to Cabinet because there is more people now who are entitled to blue badges. Crossovers. Crossovers, I understand obviously your colleague Councillor Quillen has raised is open to have meetings. It's a big challenge because you have to balance a whole range of factors, in terms of the width, but also as well, in terms of the criteria as well. We had an extensive consultation which involved people from all party consultation. I think it was noted then on it at the time. It was probably before 2018. We do try to be, I think, next on it and keep it as frustrating. Obviously, if there is individual issues, I'm always willing to meet with any local councillors from whatever party to have a discussion with, like I do, with people from all parties around this table about traffic and highways issue, as Councillor Holden is well aware from his own ward.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Muddy, the last question, sorry, and then we have to move into the next cabinet member. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Martin, you clearly got a wide brief and schemes in the borough, but schemes like Crossrail won't benefit everyone. If you wouldn't mind just touching on what more you're doing and what more we can do as a city to bridge the gap between the east and west of the boroughs.
I think it's obviously in transport. I think obviously we recognise that in terms of bridging the gap. In terms of what aspect of bridging the gap are you referring to? Are you referring to transport in terms of bridging the gap?
In terms of transport, sorry, you touched on the hope that the Mayor of London would take over the Eastfield line, for example.
Yeah. I think it's thing that transport accessibility is leading to the economic prosperity. Obviously, it's leading to in terms of how much housing, the price of housing, attracting people to areas, and the whole demographics. One of the things I think, if the Mayor of London took over overground rail services, it would increase the frequency and actually make it more attractive. I want to see Mitcham Eastfields have higher frequency trains to Victoria. There's limitations in terms of the Thameslink line. Building more capacity in London then can have knock-on effects and actually freeing up capacity elsewhere to provide more frequent services. I think we also there's a lot more reliance in terms of bus services and in terms of these to the borough. Many more people use bus services. It's actually looking for those improvements. And TfL are pushing in terms of bus services and reviewing bus services as well. And also as well, I think in terms of Tramlink east to west, I'm delighted that Tramlink is now, it runs every 6 to 7 minutes. You think over the last 20 years that's actually had a transformational effect since its opening, which was a ramshackle old line that ran from Wimbledon to West Croydon with a train about once an hour. That was frequently cancelled, transformed by Tramlink, phenomenally well used, and actually has opened the borough in creating a frequent link between the east and the west, especially for Mitcham, to get to major centres of employment like Croydon and Wimbledon.
Thank you so much, Councillor. I'm going to come over to Councillor Byers now.
Well, thank you, Chair. Just wanted to talk through briefly some of the priorities for the forthcoming year in 3 areas of my portfolio that relate to this scrutiny panel. Before turning to waste collection and street cleanliness, I want to touch briefly on air quality and climate change, which are 2 aspects of the portfolio that predate the additional responsibilities I was given in May, and that I would not wish to be overlooked by other matters. So on air quality, We need to build on the measures undertaken over the past few years in the Air Quality Action Plan, and in particular, in the next 6 months, I would hope that we would be in a position to look at proposals for some form of clean air zone in Wimbledon, to undertake more proactive work to tackle idling across the borough, and to provide greater opportunities for sustainable travel, particularly through dockless bikes. 2020 will be 2 years into the Air Quality Action Plan. It will be the midway point, so it's a good opportunity, I think, to review and perhaps refresh, taking a stock take of where we've got to and looking at what further measures we might wish to add. On climate change, following the cross-party motion agreed by Council in July, I'll be focused in the coming months at working with all of those interested from across the borough to create an action plan that sets out how the Council is going to meet the 2 targets that were set out in the motion to decarbonise the decarbonise the Council by 2030 and to decarbonise the borough by 2050. And these will no doubt be presented back to scrutiny in due course. However, inevitably, my primary focus at present in regard to the bits of the portfolio that relate to this panel has to be on the cleanliness of the borough, given the current levels of performance. We know that the service is not working in some parts of the borough and has not been working for some time. It's not everywhere, but the performance is very patchy. In thinking through what our priorities should be for addressing this, I think it's helpful to separate out what I see as the predominant challenges relating to matters that are primarily within the Council's gift to address, versus those that relate to our wider contractual arrangements with Veolia. So in regard to the former, there are a number of areas in which I think we need to take far more proactive action to address some of the issues we are currently experiencing. On the curbside collection, whilst the overall performance has stabilised, we need to address the collection challenges for flats above shops and other properties with no frontage and no space for a wheel bin, such as Hayden's Road, which are contributing to the volume of abandoned waste and street litter in these locations. And we need to look to address the challenges with some of the communal collections, particularly on estates run by housing associations. On fly tipping, the area's performance in clearing reported fly tips is actually very good, but we need to implement the fly tipping strategy that we'll be discussing later this evening in a bid to deter and prevent fly tipping incidents and reduce the overall volumes. That means more education and awareness raising, but it also means more enforcement. We can do that through more joined up working with Veolia, through exploring how we might make better use of our town centre enforcement contract when we have to re-procure it next year. But ultimately we need to increase our capacity to enforce against a greater number of fly tips. There are also areas which I think could lead to relatively quick wins and improved cleanliness, like the recent review of neighbourhood recycling centres and the forthcoming review of street bins, both of which can attract fly tips and excess waste. Removing some of these, I think, could make quite a quick difference to the cleanliness of the public realm in those areas. On reporting, I think we would all accept our current system is not particularly user-friendly, so we need to look again at our CRM and ensure we make it as easy as possible for anyone to report a missed collection, fly tip or street below grade. And on education and enforcement, we need to do more to address incorrect behaviour and ensure that residents are presenting at the right time, in the right bin, in the right way, reducing side waste, contaminated collections and street litter, and further increasing recycling. None of these issues, as far as I can see, require much, if any, support from Veolia, and there is no reason other than our own capacity that we should not be able to address them. However, whilst it is important that we tackle these issues, to my mind there is a far greater challenge underlying some of the issues that we are currently experiencing, and that is our contract with Veolia. If we don't address this, it will be very difficult, in my view, to meaningfully improve the cleanliness of the borough and address some of the seemingly intransigent issues that we experience on an almost daily basis. It is a source of acute embarrassment to me that nearly 2.5 years since the contract came into force, we find ourselves in a position with a contract that self-evidently provides insufficient resource, in which fundamental differences of opinion exist around some of the key terminology and for which there are as yet no agreed set of performance indicators underpinning it. That seems to me a very unsatisfactory position to be in. I believe there are factors which are frustrating the Council's ability to resolve some of these challenges, but I have been advised that I should not discuss them. What I can say is that my overriding priority in the coming months is to resolve these issues, which have been running for far too long, and without which I think any effort spent on other matters could prove relatively fruitless. The area in which I believe the lack of resource is manifesting itself most prominently is street cleansing. Myself, the Director and the Assistant Director spent Friday morning visiting different parts of the borough with the area to look at the state of the streets. And I think it is fair to say that we witnessed several areas where the level of cleanliness fell significantly below the standards we would expect. Mr. Edgell has committed to an improvement plan to look at addressing some of these issues, which is welcomed, and he will perhaps touch on that when he speaks later this evening. It is a frustration to me that I am unable to say more on some of these issues, but that is the position I am in. Very happy to take any questions, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Pritchard caught my eye first. I'll go to Councillor Dean, I'll go to Councillor Fairclough. But I will say, because we're about to go through the report, let's not labour too much on this and we can dig into it a bit later.
The report quite clearly indicates poor service provision in a number of ways, just in the executive summary, in just about every part that people care about, it is not delivering. So my question is quite simple. You've now come into this, and I'm very aware that you've only come into this recently. In your opinion, did Viola quote too cheap a price for this service? And secondly, what are the means and grounds by which Merton could terminate this contract on grounds of underperformance?
I think I've said that my view is there's insufficient resource in the contract, which I think probably addresses that first question. In regards to the latter point, all I would say is there are wider issues at play that I can't go into. There is a break clause in 2025, which we're all aware of, and it will be a decision for Council to take in the coming years as to whether we exercise that break clause.
Okay, I'm going to go to Councillor Dean, then Councillor Fairclough, and Councillor Miller.
So we have to fight this. I suppose I'm not surprised every time I listen to a Labour politician talk about waste, it's as if it's their first day. I think I'm on. Every time I listen to a Labour politician about waste collection and scrutiny, it's as if it's their first day ever in this area. And we absolutely said in full council meetings.
To be fair, it's his first
meeting in this area.
In this area.
Well, and I'm sure he'll be in his position as long as the last one and the one before.
I don't know, but just to be fair.
Hasn't shown his arrogance like the last ones, but let's see how we go. But the key thing is, why is it that each Labour politician doesn't seem to either understand the contract or is unwilling to share the contract? This is a public body. This is a public body. And I hear the word transparency, so I'm sick. Why can he not share with us the specifics of this contract? And why can't we do anything about it? Then I'll follow up in the report.
I thought your party actually had a copy of the contract, because it was certainly brandished at a full council meeting.
I can tell you this. I can't answer you, go on. I'll answer this.
I'll just repeat my earlier statements. I would like to discuss this far more openly, but I've been told I'm not allowed to.
I said, why not? I asked why. Why?
Councillor Fairclough.
Thank you. At risk of eliciting the same response, I wondered if you might touch briefly on your views of the effectiveness of the existing contract management and monitoring setup. And secondly, can you identify what work, if any, has been done to prepare to exercise the break clause?
So I think on contract management and monitoring, the challenge is that you are paying for a service that you assume will be undertaken to the specification that you are paying for, and the assumption therefore is that you are monitoring the implementation of that service, but the vast majority of the time the service is delivering what you are paying for. I think if you're in a position where you are having to monitor far more than that in order to generate the results that you think you should be getting for the service you're paying for, there are obviously capacity implications for us and the number of people we need to have in those roles. And I think at present we don't have that number. The assistant director, who's relatively new himself, has come in and is looking at a restructure of that team, and I think that will address some of those challenges. But it doesn't address the fact that if the contract isn't performing adequately, the amount of monitoring of performance is going to be far greater than it would be if it was performing as it should be performing.
Okay, Councillor Martin.
I need to answer the second question, sorry. So I think we're a little way away from the break at this point in time, and given the fairly limited officer capacity we have, my view is that officers should not be detracted from trying to resolve the issues with this service and contract in order to look at alternatives when we are still some time away. That being said, we will want to understand what the alternatives are at the point at which we have to take a decision on the break. So there will come a point when officers will be asked to present Cabinet with the alternative options, and Cabinet will have to take a view as to whether there is an option that is preferable to continuing with the current contract.
Okay, so Councillor Mundine and Councillor Holding will move on to the next item on the agenda.
Thank you, Chair. Toby, so your predecessor, Councillor Brunt, said to this committee in June 2018 that this contract will save money, increase recycling and make Merton streets cleaner. Has this happened? And appreciate your candour today to this committee, what's the different opinion, what's changed?
So to be fair to Councillor Brunt, I think that was also the leadership's view of what the contract would deliver, and probably what the objectives of the outsource were in the first place. It has saved money. If you look at the budget, we are paying less than we were when we ran the service ourselves. I think recycling is the real positive from the last couple of years, and the containerisation of waste has led to a significant increase in our recycling rates, particularly on food waste. Has it left the streets cleaner? No, I don't think it has. And I think, unfortunately, that is undermining the good performance in those other areas, because that should be the overriding objective of a waste and street cleansing service.
Okay, Councillor.
I suppose I have another quick comment because my question has been covered already. I welcome the fact that this latest cabinet member, the third or fourth in the same number of years, actually appears to get it. You've made the right noises tonight, which is welcome, and I hope we can get this fixed once and for all, because residents have been demanding action and improvements for at least 3 years, if not longer. And we warned about these problems, so we're very grateful that you actually understand and actually going to do something about it. Thank you.
Okay, so we are now going to move on to agenda item 5, waste recycling and street cleaning, coincidentally. So this is how it's going to go. We're going to get Chris Lee, our director, to introduce the item. We will then hear from residents who have applied to speak here today. We'll get 3 minutes each. Please don't make me cut you off, unfortunately. I will have to, because as you can see, it is now 8:10 and I want us to really get into this. So when we go to the panel members for questions, we have decided to theme them. So we will start off with the collections. I will only be taking questions and follow-up questions on the bin collections themselves. We will then move on to street cleanliness, and we will just looking at street cleanliness. And then we will move on to comms and reporting, and we'll just be talking about that at that point. Because otherwise we're just going to miss too much in the melee. So please do try and stick to the themes as much as possible. Avoid statements, let's try and actually look at issues here. So, before we get started, I just wanted to thank the residents who took the time to write into us, who couldn't be here tonight. So I wanted to thank William Petch from the South Bridgeway Residents Association, Sally Gibbon from the Edge Hill Area Residents Association, Tony Dines from Edge Hill Court Limited, Anne Baldwin from Eastfields Residents Association, Siobhan McDonough MP, Stephen Hammond MP. So I'll move on to the speakers. So our first speaker is Tom Walsh from Sustainable Merton. Is he here? Oh, getting some time back. So can I have Sarah Cheetham, please? Is that microphone free now? Yes, are you okay to sit there? Yes. Okay. I'll just get my my stopwatch off if you don't mind, please.
Sure.
Oh, I'm sorry. I beg your pardon. As I said, I'd get Chris Lee just introduce you. Are you happy to stay sitting there? Okay, thank you. Sorry, Chris.
So I'll be brief, Chair, and I'll lead off on some of the points that Councillor Monday touched upon, because whilst I'm not here to say that this contract is working well, or in the way we expected, but the objectives that the Council set in letting this contract were three: to save money, and we are annually saving at least £1.6 million on this contract, and that's money that's spent elsewhere on essential services. We set another objective to reduce carbon and be greener, fewer vehicle miles, and the recycling levels that we achieve now have never been achieved before, and continue to improve. And that's saving more money on disposal of waste. But on the third objective, to keep the borough clean, we clearly failed. And that, as Councillor Byers referred to, it is at least in part down to some work that the Council needs to redouble its efforts on, and some of the activity would be earlier. And I don't want this panel to be under any illusion that that isn't the top priority for me and my staff in terms of the contract management, client management of this contract, and the way that we work with Veolia, the way that we enforce this contract. And Councillor Byers has touched upon some areas where all four boroughs with this contract are grappling the nature of the contract and areas of negotiation. And some of those are commercially sensitive and simply cannot be exposed in a public meeting whilst you seek to resolve them. The contract is a public document. It's available on the web. But what I'm saying is we aren't able to discuss the minutiae of discussions about a contract that's 2.5 years old. Some of the elements in it have clearly changed. You can see in the report before you, flighted volumes have gone up and up, not just here but nationally. As a responsible client, we need to sit down with the contractor and talk about those aspects of the contract that have changed, because it's clearly affecting the performance on the ground. We can feel that, we can see it. And terminating the contract, terminating any contract is not without pain and potential financial consequences, and we shouldn't take that lightly. The break clause is some years off. Our intention is to make this contract work, and Veolia's intention is to make this contract work. We're clearly not there yet, but we continue to strive, particularly around street cleanliness, to address that. Veolia have agreed to submit an improvement plan, particularly addressing that. In the east of the borough, it's significantly poorer than in other parts of the borough, and we aim to achieve, or to have that plan by the end of this month, in order to ensure that we can improve performance.
Thank you very much. Sorry to have interrupted you. So would you, yeah.
Hi, my name's Sarah, I live in Mitcham. I've come today to give you a really frank account of just how bad rubbish in our area is and why I'm so really very angry about it. Every single time I take my 3-year-old out, I have to tell her constantly on every street in our area to avoid rubbish, broken glass and dog poo. It's been like this since Veolia took over the contract, and it's getting far, far worse. The area looks like a rubbish tip and it encourages a small minority in our society who don't care to add to it. It's utterly depressing, and I've looked at us moving away from the area because of it. The knock-on impact of increased vitamin and generally on social behaviour is huge. Endless emails, online reporting and requesting information about the service over 2 years have done nothing. I still don't have the information I asked for. The council of Veolia come across as incompetent, negligent and like you just do not care. I'm far from the only one. I'm sure you know the Mucky Merton hashtag, the press coverage, the local campaigns and politicians complaining. A local discussion on Nextdoor has got endless comments and talk of legal action. It has to be time for the council and Veolia to stand up, stop finger pointing and overhaul the service. Our area is plagued by litter and now it needs more than just a decent level of rubbish collection to clear it up. I'm working with local groups to set up our own rubbish collection. I've asked the council for support, but I've had no reply. And it feels like you no longer even have the decency to reply to emails. Mitcham does not deserve this. I want to work constructively to help solve it, but you must understand just how damaging it is to live in the area right now. I know some areas of Merton are bad too, but there are some that are noticeably much cleaner. Mitcham should be the same. I want to know what the council and Veolia are going to do to change to provide the service you should be providing us with. And I also have another question from another resident who wants to know, since charging for bulky waste collection has been introduced, have your costs decreased or increased in terms of overall waste collection? There used to be a free service for bulky waste collection in 15 months, which is now gone.
Okay, does anyone want to ask any clarification or any questions? No? Thank you so much for the time. Our next speaker is James Leake from the Wimbledon Union Residents Association. Sorry. And you two have 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Wimbledon Union Residents Association represents some 20 residents associations, mainly in the north of the borough, with about 6,000 residents. I mention that because I think one of the areas where the council could do better is to consult with RAs and with Wirra. I mean, I had a very helpful meeting with Charlie Baker a couple of months ago on behalf of Wirra, and more meetings and consultations like that, as a general point, I think are much more helpful sometimes than just you're talking to the odd individual residents, so please bear that in mind. I've got 5 points to make. We've got 72 pages of reports here, so I don't want to go into every one of them, but just 5 key things that I think are important. It will be helpful for RAs to understand the structure and the organisation of who does what in waste and streets. And I did ask Charlie for that, and I hope we're going to get that soon. Not so we can call you every time, every minute of the day and night, but so at least we know who to talk to when there's a major problem. And on that, I come on to communications, which I think are one of the weakest points, which the council can sort out for itself and isn't dependent on Veolia. The online reporting we've been hearing for a long time is going to be improved. Please tell us when and what will happen to do that. Secondly, telephone reporting, it's in all the reports, it's inadequate, people hang on for far too long. But the problem is that even with the online reporting and the telephone reporting, things often don't happen. I had an example today of a resident who's been writing now. He wrote to Charlie Baker to get his green waste bin collected after waiting a week. Charlie, in credit to Charlie, got it done the next day. But it can't be right that we have to call the boss in order to get something done. So what I'd like you to look at is what actually happens between an online report or a telephone report being received and some action being taken. I think there's a big gap there, and that's nothing to do with Veolia, it's to do with how we tell Veolia what's wrong. Side waste policy is important. A lot of residents don't yet understand about side waste, and if you're talking about a consultation on it, please in due course give information to RAs about what is acceptable side waste and what isn't, and stuff outside your bins. At the moment it's being collected, but I think that the intention was it would not be collected. But if you suddenly start saying we're not collecting it, you have a big problem. Street litter bins are a problem. I'm glad to see you're going to do a consultation on it. Please can that consultation include RAs? There is a problem, I think, in regular cleaning and collection from a number of street bins, and all that results in is more fly tipping. I see numerous examples where when a bin is full, people think, well, it's fair game, I'll put a bag beside it. So when you do that consultation, please will you talk to us in Residents Association. So the overall thrust is that RAs are a huge resource, you should use it better than you are. Thank you.
So do you have any points of clarification? Our next speaker is Mark Gale.
On the 9th of August last year, I had a meeting with Scott Edgell around from Veolia to take a tour of the ward with arrangement pointing out all the issues. Since then, this was changed, apart from 3 points being 3 of the missing bins have returned, although it looks like they're going to be taken away now at the neighbour recycling points, which is a bad idea. Unused glutton rechargeable vacuum cleaners, which used to be parked up outside the rear car park, now live at the tip, and the yellow transfer bins are no longer left around Ravensbury. But every other issue is still present. Drains remain blocked, bin collections, both communal and bags, are still missed. Litter bins are left overflowing for more than 2-hour contracts, and normally for more than 2 days. Green road sweeper bags are uncollected. Major roads such as Bishop's Roads and Hedger Avenue are litter strewn well beyond the contracted DEFRA standard. Still Christmas trees in both my ward of Ravensbury and neighbouring Walton Helier on my way today. Fly posters are ignored and in some cases encouraged by the council. Bins and boxes are not returned to properties. Bins and boxes are not collected from properties, creating a culture of leaving them on the pavement and greens. Echo does not appear to be working. How can whole rounds be missed? Not enough Echo terminals for the vehicles. You claim that Echo had rotors and frequencies, but collections don't meet the rotors. The online reported system now no longer accepts mobile phone-sized images. We know that the website could deal with it. Why has this been removed? Over the past 2 years, we've been told that there are numerous service failures, deductions in negotiations. Are we still in this limbo state? And I'd like to also give apologies for Sarah Sharp, who can't be able to speak today. It was a due attempt.
Any points of clarification? Thanks, Mark. So our next final speaker is Dan.
When the council mooted the outsourcing of our waste, the instinct of many in the borough was that it was a bad idea. In this very council building, I explained in numerous meetings that what was proposed couldn't work. Our in-house service was already stripped back and unable to cope with demands placed upon it. Here were councillors promising a like-for-like service, cost savings, a better service. We were told to believe a cheaper service for taxpayers would, from a lower spend, produce a profit for a private company, whilst at the very least maintaining standards. The numbers didn't add up. Residents pleaded with the council not to outsource waste, not to introduce costly rebins, most definitely not to move to a fortnightly waste collection, and to listen to residents. We were ignored. More than 2 years in, millions have been spent. More taxpayers' money is plugging gaps in the service, as we've now discovered, with inexplicably no fines being imposed. And our council keeps the details of this outsourced provision a jealously guarded secret, thereby assiduously avoiding public scrutiny. The new service, much vaunted by our council cabinet, is a shambles of epic proportion. So rather than the like-for-like service promised by our business-like council, and those very few people who said they were experts in negotiating contracts, we instead have mucky Merton on steroids. Filthy streets, overflowing bins, public bins mysteriously disappearing, with cries from Veolia of "not us, Governor" when challenged, until the bins just as mysteriously return. Roads left unswept and weed-ridden, bags of rubbish collected by Veolia left on street corners for days at a time. Numbers of vital street sweepers slashed, alleyways and pathways left off the contract and stuffed with uncollected waste. And the result? Residents, who are already paying for this service, working as free labour, picking unswept litter and endlessly policing dirty roads and fly tips. And instead of saying thank you, as residents prevent the borough getting worse through their tireless unpaid efforts, or more importantly, taking responsibility and apologising, our council leaders engage in local authority gaslighting. To everyone witnessing this endless filth, we are told the service is improving, there is no problem, or in the insulting words of our council leader, only a few people are bothered by the state of Merton. I'm furious. Our council leaders must take responsibility for what they have inflicted without consultation, without an adequate trial. They must stop the weasel words, stop insulting every resident by saying they have retained weekly waste collection, and return to truthfulness. And it is time the councillors in our leading party located their integrity, came out from the shadow of strong leadership which is blighting this borough, and spoke up for the residents who entrusted them with the precious responsibility of caring for this borough.
Any points of clarification? Right, okay. So we are now going to hand over to Scott Edgell from Peoria to answer some of the points that were raised from the residents, and also some questions that we submitted beforehand as a panel, and then we'll ask follow-ups. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. If I start with the residents' comments and try and answer some of those questions, I do believe there is, and I'm well aware of some issues. I've been on some drive arounds in Mitcham. There is certainly some areas that we need to tackle with street cleansing. I would like to meet you afterwards to talk about the particular areas. I'm well aware of some issues in pollards and non-filtered, so there's some issues really that we need to address. And a plan will be forthcoming about how we will address that, how we'll bring on some more supervision and potentially some more resources to really tackle that area. The containerisation of waste has been successful in some areas, but I don't think it's been as successful in Mitcham, and I don't think the side waste policy is necessarily helping there. So there's certainly some work we can do to try and improve the streets. If I can just see you afterwards. Mr. Leake, most of the comments, most of the comments really more towards the local authority, but the side waste policy, I do think we need to be careful. We can't just, it isn't in the contract that we take side waste. One of the points that's raised in the questions from the councillors is that, are we taking side waste? Yes, we are in many of the parts of the borough. And also about bins being over, like a crocodile bin, it's not the technical term, but just so everyone understands. We do find it is very difficult for staff to actually locate the container onto the cone lift when they are that, but we're not refusing them. But we would like people to transfer. Sorry, I might be sometime. But we're not refusing them, but we do want to migrate more waste. We've obviously seen the success of the recycling rate. We've seen how much food waste and how much general waste, I think a 12% reduction in general waste that the contract has achieved. And there's a really significant increase in the food waste. The street litter bins, I've actually got some numbers here for street litter bins which might be of interest to the group, if I can just find them. So we effectively clear 6,328 litter bins a month. That's what we're scheduled to complete, without any additional work coming in. In May, we received 41 reports. In June, 30 reports. And in July, 64 reports. That's around about 1% failure rate of us not actually achieving the schedules. Now, I appreciate what people have been commenting on, that there seems to be some breakdown in communication, but we are actioning those. We are actioning the work that we receive through ECHO. ECHO is live. ECHO is in all of the street cleansing vehicles that respond to these litter bins. So I just think that puts that in perspective. We aren't talking about epidemic proportions of overflowing litter bins that are being reported to Veolia for us to action. The other issues from Mark Gale and I have met, and we did go around, and there's many issues that, Christmas trees, Mark, let's be clear, they're collected for 2 weeks after Christmas.
But they're not though, are they?
They are
That's
collected.
the issue.
So if you can let me speak, so you had your chance. So we had Christmas week, Christmas trees are collected for 2 weeks after Christmas. Once they become fly tipped, we do then clear them as fly tips. But I need to be clear, the service isn't there for months afterwards to just be continually clearing Christmas trees. The service is already, with the garden waste service, we're trying to recycle as many as possible. I am aware of St Helier Avenue. I drive up and down St Helier Avenue particularly, and into the St Helier estate. I'm well aware of some of the street cleansing issues we've got there. Many of the issues are down to, I've suggested some ideas about the way the environment is. The green spaces are currently a matter of a point that we're discussing with the local authority. But St Helier Avenue, we send a cage up there every single day to clear the black sacks that are presented. It's a fortnightly collection service, and I do think we are working with the local authority to try and improve the enforcement. But we could literally send them twice a day, and I still don't think you'd be satisfied with the service we provide. There's a number of other issues. As far as the point was raised about fines from the fines, there has been fines deducted from the contract. The SPIs are published on the website. They are there. They are currently under review. We are trying to tailor those to make them more responsive to the contract. We're working with the borough. They're under review by the boroughs. I do feel that Veolia has taken that. We've been working hard to improve on those service performance indicators and ensure that we do meet the challenges, not completely, but certainly improvements on what we've been tasked with. If I could just move on quickly to tackling some of the collections from large estates, which is a point that's come up from questions from councillors. Veolia doesn't define capacity. We work with the managing agents, we work with the local authority. The managing agents do need to procure new containers. We haven't changed any general waste containers. We introduced more recycling containers, more paper containers, and more food waste containers, but we haven't actually. So there is a big project being undertaken by Veolia, by the council, by John and Charlie and their teams, to really address the issue with managing, with the housing association officers to find solutions and come up with a template that works for these larger blocks. Some areas I do think capacity and frequency needs to be introduced. The major thing that's failing is if you go to these sites and you look at the recycling containers, they're 3/4 empty. That's the issue. I'm currently deploying five vehicles on the communal service. Now 3 of those are on refuse and 2 are on recycling. There should be 4 because it should be an equal balance between recycling and refuse. I'm having to deploy an additional vehicle now that is at Veolia's risk and Veolia's cost, absolutely. Until we can get these people to track. Now this is an industry issue and we'll be addressing it, but there's more work needs to be done with the communals. To put it in perspective about this failing service, which I do find quite frustrating because I am proud of the work that's been achieved by Veolia since we've arrived. It isn't finished and there's a lot of work to be done. But to put it in missed collections, we receive around 7 per day for communal. Now we get a lot, we've actually moved it off afternoon service because we have a lot more issues with parking, so we've moved it onto the days, so we get less parking issues. There's around 426 collections a day, blocks we service per day. We miss around 7 of those we can't get access to or we have issues with. That's around 1.64%. Now that number continues to decline and the service has certainly improved over the last few months. I would like to point out there's a collection statistic that might have interested you. There was an independent survey carried out in March, which I'm sure will be published shortly. It was carried out by a company called Westco at the SLWP's request, which showed 82% of residents were satisfied with their waste collection services in March for 4 weeks in 2019. That was the segment they used. And that was 5 months after we undertook a huge service change. Really significant. We went fortnightly, we went containerised, and we introduced side waste. So we've undertaken a huge, and for 82%, I'm not unhappy with that figure at this point, but there is still room for growth.
So we talked about receiving being collected at the moment.
Yeah.
Let's come back with some follow-up questions from the panel, and then we can move on to the next theme, which would be street cleaning and inviting us to try and keep all of our questions around collections. So I think it's Councillor Dean who wants to go next.
So I'm assuming before October 2018 the Veolia existed, and I'm assuming in your secret negotiations with the secret South London Waste Partnership, you didn't say, this is a dreadful job, we're going to fail at it, and after 2.5 years we're going to be making excuses. I'm assuming you put together a very slick presentation that the world was going to be great. But tell me, in your secret meetings that we weren't allowed in, I was thrown out of one, did you say this was a terrible job you couldn't achieve, or did you tell them it was brilliant and you would achieve it?
I wasn't part of the bid team, but I have read the documents, and you do have a point. As in with all bid documents, it's all about change and evolution. I think the biggest problem from Veolia's perspective on this contract is managing people's expectations. I think there is a lot of work to be done to transfer this contract into the place where it needs to be. I think some of the targets, there were some really early mistakes about changing the street cleansing resource before we'd actually changed into a containerised solution, and the first few months of the street cleansing were very difficult. I do think there's been some errors in the bid, we've acknowledged that to the local authority, but I don't think it was all sunshine and light. I do think the borough has changed. We've certainly received far more fly tips than we expected in the contract, which has meant our resources have had to change significantly. And we've been slowly working with the local authority to deal with those.
So just a reminder, Hannah, we're sticking to bin collections. Can I just go to somebody else now? Immediately on bin collections,
It is. The fly tips are down to the fact, and you can come in my road today, you don't pick up the waste, it will be fly tipped tomorrow. That's a guarantee. I'll tell you that now. And your bins are not, those ugly wheel bins are not put into your vans. They never have been, never will be. They go into the yellow ones and then they go in. All the side waste is left, and your men are fantastic. No one to blame them. They do a brilliant job and they're paid badly for it. But what I want is the system, and it's rubbish. Rubbish on our streets, and it's not picked up today. You can drive home with me or walk home with me and I'll show you the rubbish that's been left. Rubbish that's been left because you won't pick it up, because the council won't pick it up, and it's tomorrow's fly tip. And the reason you ain't getting so many calls is we can't get through to the system because you are 39 in the queue and we have jobs.
Okay, so thank you very much. So we're going to go on. We're going to go to I'm going to go to Councillor Sanders and Councillor Fraser next, and then Councillor Pritchard.
Thank you, Scott. Coming back to you about the change over to the communal bins, new bins on the communal estate, has rather sort of confused me a bit, because I'm still really not quite sure who was responsible on the Eastfields estate in particular. All the problems started right at the beginning when the wrong bins were provided to the residents, so they were changed from the old container bins that they'd had in the past and they were replaced by bins that were totally inadequate to take the capacity of the waste. I was led to believe that that was the owner's fault for supplying the wrong bins, but now I'm getting the impression that it was because of the service or the agents, i.e. Clarion Housing, who, yeah. Thank you.
The Eastfield Estates has been having the hokey cokey with bins coming in and out. It isn't completely communal property. When it's looked at, it could be dealt with a 240 litre or 180 litre container per household with individual bins. I don't think that works. I've seen pictures of on collection day with bins stacked up, and we talked about crocodile bins, but bins and side waste, because there isn't currently a culture of recycling that needs to be worked on to encourage those people. I think there's some options that are being discussed by the local authority about we've gone in, we've gone back out, and I think there's a final solution there. That is an example of where it looks like on paper the solution we proposed would work. I think we're going to revert back to a communal bin approach with recycling separated from the general waste so that it doesn't become contaminated. But I'm sure we can talk afterwards about that particular solution.
Councillor Fraser?
Thank you, Chair. I think I heard you mention somewhere about Low Thornton Road, which is the road I'm from, and I'm really very angry, and I feel just like some of the people who've spoken, because I've lived there 38 years and I've seen, I can't describe what it looks like now, even today. But going back to bin collection, what I've seen, and this is, I've taken some pictures sometimes. I live on Rowan Road. It's easy to see what's going on. And some of your men, I'm not quite sure where they are, because I don't see headphones, so I don't imagine they're distracted that way. But they go to one house and they skip the next one and they go to the other one, including mine. And I don't have to tell them that I'm a councillor, and I don't think they need to know that. They need to collect the bins. Sorry, mine, sometimes they don't collect it at all. And I have to wait a whole week, especially the food bin, even though I go online to collect it. Some of my residents they've been putting their bins on the pavement, and I said, you're really not meant to. We were told arm's length from your gate. But the men who are collecting said, if you don't put it out there, we're not collecting it. And so I think they need to be spoken to, because it looks like, I don't know if they know their education or their work program or what, but something needs to be done.
Thank you.
We were actually, as part of the drive arounds we did last week, actually the Longthorpe board was a particular focus on Road was actually the street cleansing wasn't in a particularly poor state on the main road, but the side roads could certainly do with some attention, which will be addressed as part of our street cleansing plan. The presentation, you're absolutely correct, is one of the points I wanted to talk about in this presentation. Bins need to be presented not on pavement. We don't want them on the pavement. We want the crews to return them inside the properties. Crews should not be skipping properties, and I will be addressing that. If it's refuse recycling, I'll address it with both crews, personally, to take that away. But they shouldn't be, they know what their responsibilities are, they know that they should be collecting bins from, we want them just inside the property. Arms reach is a good way of suggesting that. I am going to suggest with the local authority that we start publicising on the website some pictures with ticks and crosses about which some of the other local authorities have started to do in Croydon and in Kingston, to try and clarify where the position of bins. If bins are up into people's gardens, no, that's not. That they need to be presented, and that's where we have a number of lockouts that we're dealing with.
Okay, sorry about the microphones. Councillor Fairclough, and then I'm going to go to Councillor Holden, and then Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Chair. In the officer report in front of us, it says the current level of missed collections does not meet our requirements and the performance and reliability of the collection crews needs to be improved. I wondered if that was your view, and if you might expand on whether it is or not, why you think that might be the case.
I would agree that the level of missed collections, I mean, you're looking at most services around this between 7 and 10 incidents per day, but that soon tallies up, and when you're looking at the miss per 100,000, which is an industry statistic, we're not there. Some of that is down to crew behaviour, some of that is down to presentation. There's a mixture of items. There's some crews that perform the best for us, that do their lockouts, that do the contamination and put stickers on, actually then get the most missed collections and come back to us and say, this, you know, you asked us to follow a system. So there's some work to be done on both sides. But we're not happy with it. We will see an improvement. In the terminology of the lifespan of these contracts, we are in still, I know it's 29 months in, but we are still in very early days. There is a lot of work to be done with the frontline operatives. We have done a number of things to offer in enhancements to drivers. We're working on the drivers' rates of pay. We've certainly improved the loaders' rates of pay in line with the SLWP contract. So we're looking to recruit the right people to do a good job. There is some people we've had to go to agencies which haven't met our requirements, and we've been working through that workforce. So I know I'm not satisfied, and there'll be more work to be done.
Councillor Holden?
Thank you. I've often at these meetings before raised the issue of small blocks of flats, so they're neither typical large estates or flats with shops there, something in between. These small blocks, often between 5 or 6 flats, all the way up to maybe 10 or 11. And there's quite a lot of those in Wimbledon, particularly in Hillside Ward, and often on the hill. So can either yourself or the council assure me that they've all been properly assigned now? Because up until only a couple of months ago, some of them still were on the system. And also, these blocks of flats tend to be missed more often than not. So normal houses seem to be fine. It seems to be these blocks of flats that are frequently missed, and it is a source of concern. I still get quite a lot of emails on that. And the third part to that is 1 or 2 of these blocks occasionally have their bins disappeared, and some of the residents like to know why is that.
As far as I'm aware, the project the people working on the project to go out and assess all these blocks, the work has been completed, and then the schedule has been updated and made sure it's clear that it's not for those ones. It's not a curbside collection solution where we have to go in and find those containers because it's a communal collection. I will certainly take a photo, give you some examples. I will see you afterwards, and we'll talk about Hillside. As far as bins disappearing, bins do go in the back of a vehicle when it goes up on the lift. That happens. It doesn't happen. It shouldn't happen every time. It's down to user error. There is some mechanisms on the contract that should stop that, but that is something that happens. We are constantly with. And also, bins become a commodity when you have a 180 litre restriction, and you're only providing that a fortnightly service. Suddenly, bins. We are seeing the number of bins being ordered, far outweighs what we'd expect at this point in the contract. So there is people trying to increase their capacity. So bins do become a commodity and then do get moved around. Some of it comes back to the staff not returning the bins correctly, and that is a constant battle that I will be doing until I'm 110 if I live that long. But that will be a constant battle in this industry for as long as to getting staff to return the bins to the right location.
Okay, Councillor Mundy, and then we'll move on.
Thank you, Chair. So I've got 4 points. First, to do with the estate, so Polital particularly. Second, the assured collection process. Third, coming back to Chris's point that he made. And fourth, just to deal with the good things in a contract that we don't actually talk about, which is batteries and clothes collection, given that the increased focus on those as the need for recycling. So firstly, when we talk about Polital estate particularly, in February 2018, Scott, I think we spoke to this committee and said that cars in estates particularly cause a problem. I understand you've changed how the time you collect to mitigate that. But I understand there's still an issue in Pollard's about overspill collection. Could you confirm, has that been paid for by Merton? Is it happening? From my understanding from residents and the Housing Association, it is not happening, and it's costing them £15,000 a month.
I can confirm that on Wednesdays and Thursdays in the Mitcham area, we are receiving compensation to clear, which isn't in the contract, the side waste. Pollard should be receiving, as part of that, I believe it's Thursday collection, I believe, they should be receiving the clearance. So if that's not the case, I will certainly ensure that those crews are reminded to clear all side waste. That actually comes back to the point you made around yellow bins, why we're still using the yellow transfer bins, because of the side waste that we're still receiving. So that's why we're having to take those out. We don't want to. We actually want to take those away, but actually some of the crews I've tried to remove them from have come back to me and said, come and look at the side waste. Actually, the chief exec, Jed, go and went out and witnessed some of the collections in Mitchell. So I think we'll be feeding back some other points.
Could you, so I had a constituent who had repeated miscollections, and thankfully through Charles we put him on the assured collection scheme, which I thought was fantastic. But he's had another miscollection. So could you just talk through that process briefly, and how can that happen, and how can we prevent that happening in the future?
The assured collection is effectively for people that have had issues where we've had difficulty finding locating the containers, or they're in an unusual location. We then put a task on, it can be for 2 weeks or 4 weeks or longer. When we work down the street on our Echo tablet, we have a list of properties, but actually you're able, when you've completed the road, as long as you've done your assisted collections, which is where for elderly, we have to physically swipe off with your finger, you have to swipe off that address. And assured collections becomes a little bit like an assisted collection, and you have to physically turn off that number. That number is lit up in a different colour. It's very clear to make it clear to the driver, who should be giving instructions to his crew. We have an assured collection task there, and let's go and find that property, making sure we do. That's what, but they do, it changes every day because they do go on and off. If there's someone that's had a further issue, if you could let me know, and I'll place them back on the issue for a longer period.
Thank you. And I think this may be, I mean, you've all, to Chris and Scott, speaking quite frankly, you've all hinted that the contract now is different than the contract originally taken out. And with, Chris has quite rightly said that 1.6 million has been saved currently. So what are you reviewing the contract to see what needs to be put into it in order to make it fit for what the requirements are now that the environment has changed?
Yes, that process has been underway for quite some time. We've been feeding back. I'm not going to go into details. If you just think about the recycling rate increase as one thing. If you've got a huge increase in recycling rate, you're going to need more equipment and more vehicles. There's also been things like property growth. So there's areas that, yes, that need to be looked at and addressed, and that's currently part of the process with the South London Waste Partnership and the boroughs.
So I'm going to have to move on. There was actually just 3 points I wanted to raise on the report, if that's okay. It's just that in your misbin collection in the report, you don't have garden waste on there, and I would like to know why. If that was quite a helpful target, that's going to help us hit our target of increasing our recycling rates. And also, we all get complaints of people not getting their garden waste collected. Secondly, the point about, at 2.7, the point about the tagging system now being different to what it was originally, I want to know what that difference is, because since the start of the contract we've been told that bins have been being tagged and there's been an enforcement thing in place, so what's the difference now to then? And lastly, given the issues with the large estates, the flats, what consultation or communication was given to these landlords that they're going to have to significantly adjust their collection schedules and that they might have to provide bigger bin stores because they're going to have waste staying around for a lot longer? Sorry for being a bit, if that's taken up too much time, but can we move on straight to
I have some questions based on inaccuracies I need to cover.
Is it about bin collection?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, the system does not say 1.6 million because they've forgotten to put in the cost of procurement, the cost of lorries and the cost of leaders, which was £8.6 million.
Okay.
Secondly, they talk about recycling rate. The recycling objective has been missed every month except for one. So that's not an increase in recycling. To be fair, since Labour comes to power in 2010, it's been missed every year. But specifically, when I'm sitting in the meeting, I've been told it's increasing. It is not. Except one single month, which is still missed. It's just higher than the lower ones.
Okay.
So I just want those clarity. And the last thing is that the structure is wrong, and that's why you have your yellow bins. The people who do the work are under immense pressure. They are fantastic at what they do. You need to change the structure and give them a break if that's all right.
Thank you.
So the saving, I'll repeat again, is in excess of 1.6 million per annum. You can look at the council's accounts and you can see there, but in comparison to the 2016-17 budget, the current budget is more than 1.6 million less than that. The cost of procurement was largely covered by a government grant for transformation because this was a 4-borough approach to achieving economies of scale. The borough's contribution was much smaller than it would have been had it not been for that. I think it was about £1.5 million grant from government. So cost of procurement was largely covered by that. The cost of the vehicles and the bins are all included in the saving that we're making. The department has a cost passed on by corporate services annually to cover the capital recharge, to cover the cost of the vehicles and the bins. So there's absolute transparency that we are now spending far, far less than we used to on this contract. And the procurement cost was more than covered by that rate. The recycling rate, if anything, we've been too ambitious with the target we've set. We've set a target of 48%. Last year we were achieving 33%. I think we'll achieve 48%, but it's step by step. You don't achieve it on day one. And as we've seen, we still have a problem across the borough in terms of an understanding and a compliance with the methodology that we have. We still have the presentation of side waste, we still have contamination in bins, but we will get there. 48%, indeed the current level of performance, touching on 45%, is top quartile across London, touching upon top decile. You still have neighbouring boroughs that are in the 20s. So we should be under no illusion, and we shouldn't let excellence be the enemy of good here. We are on a trajectory of significant improvement in terms of recycling. And that, I think, will continue. And I suppose coming back to some of the comments earlier, I would say to the panel that the methodology that the borough has adopted is the right methodology. It's the application of it, it's the compliance with it, it's the implementation of it that needs work. We see this methodology, alternate weekly collection, wheeled bins, separation of waste, up and down the country, and it achieves the best performance. We cannot afford, financially or for the planet, to go back to a different methodology that has the sort of carbon use, the sort of recycling levels that we used to achieve. We simply can't afford it either financially or environmentally. So the methodology is correct. It's getting the application of that methodology implemented as quickly as we can.
And just on the point of why is our garden waste not there, and the tagging system, is it different to what it used to be?
So to tackle the first question regarding the garden waste service. Since April of 17, working closely with Veolia, we significantly continued to grow our customer base. We're at circa 9,000 customers from a starting point of just below 6,000 customers. It is a subscription service, so it is a highly valued service. In terms of measuring miscollections, that's measured by per 100,000 as in the other waste streams. And with an alternate weekly collection, and with a client base of only 9,000 customers, to measure it per 100,000 as the other waste streams are, gives a very distorted image of how that service is performing, which is why it's not included within the per 100,000 collections as the other waste streams. In terms of the tagging of the bins, that has continued. We've enhanced it now over a 3-month rolling period to follow up the work that Veolia are doing in identifying areas of contamination, whereby now those areas where Veolia identify households that are contaminating their bins, following up with that tag, and they're tagging circa 2,000 bins within Merton over the last 3 months. We're following those instances up with a letter from the council, from our engagement team, and where there's repeated failures to rectify that, we're following that with a second letter with an invitation for that household to meet with our engagement team face to face to go through their waste presentation. So that's the enhanced service that we're now providing. And then on the third occasion, if there is a repeat offence, we do back that up with our enforcement activity. But thankfully, we've not got to the stage where there's been third offenders.
Okay, I think Dr. Legal is running out of time. So we're going to go on to street cleaning and fly tipping now. So again, from the questions we've submitted previously, Scott, did you want to say anything first, and then I'll move on to Councillor Pritchard, and then anybody else want to go next time?
The first point I'd like to make is around fly tipping. The question we were asked from the councillors is what we're going to do to improve the performance of clearing fly tips, and from what point of view are we working with the Merton enforcement teams. We're responsible for clearing fly tips outside time tables within 24 hours. We don't clear them from private land. It's not actually the council's responsibility to clear them from private land, which is why the contract is set up in that way, and 2 hours from town centres. In May, we received 1,102. We achieved 100% of those within the SLA. In June, 100% of the 1,019, and unfortunately we dropped a little bit in July to 99.42%. We had 9 missed where we missed SLA, but actually the numbers have increased to 1,539. We have supplied the Merton Council officers with and their enforcement team with the top offending locations. We are learning. There is more information coming about. This is what we see as reported, and I acknowledge there are a lot of fly tips that are not reported. Our crews, we feel, pick up as many fly tips as actually we have reported as they go about their daily rounds. So I do think fly tips are, we've actually got some further information on the trend. We've actually, since February 19, really been achieving that sort of SLA. We've brought in a lot more monitoring. The staff at Farmer was responsive to actually dealing with that, and we really think we've turned a corner on some of the fly tipping reported. We've still not seen fly tippings reduce. The fly tipping trend is increasing from averaging around 800 to averaging around 1,200 a month, and that is something that obviously we need to address and have some sort of fly tipping strategy with the local authority to deal with. As far as street cleansing, we touched on the point earlier. Around, there are some areas that really require some further work. We really focused on some wards that were some of the worst. Gravelly was a real challenge, and there's been some real improvements in Gravelly. I mean, I've been there. I've been tracking Links and Sealy and Goring Park Avenue. These areas they are real challenge. They're a real challenge, and we've got but that probably has been at maybe the expense of not being able to do everything at the same time. And there's certainly a plan that needs to be produced for Pollards and Longthornton and some of the other areas, because I was certainly disappointed with some of the street cleansing standards. I think some other points were raised around weeding, and where I was asked to outline the policy or the process for weeding. We used the same contractor. The original maps and information was supplied that was used by the local authority. I've actually increased it. It was 2 in the bid, and I've actually increased it to 3. I don't think 2 is enough, so I increased it to 3 sprays of the glyphosate. We currently have 3 applications. We started around the 28th of March. It's a 5-week process to apply, then again on the 17th of June, and then we'll be again on mid-September. The reports, we normally then, the environmental managers, we receive reports back from the contractor, and the environmental managers will go and check after 2 to 3 weeks to look at the kill rate, to look at have they gone brown. I can tell you they didn't. In large parts of the area, we asked them to produce their GPS records, which is part of the contract with us. They were unable to do so, so we sent them back to reapply. Particularly in some areas, the tree bases really require some urgent attention, and that's something we're working on quite quickly to deal with that. But we haven't seen the kind of kill rates that we would expect from the glyphosate, and we've asked them, and we've sent them out to reapply a second application at no one's cost. It's not Merton's cost or Veola's cost. We've asked the contractors to go back and do that. So that's roughly how we deal with our weeding. There was I think I touched the point on litter bins earlier. The system does learn. It's analysts. We've got analysts. We've got a dedicated analyst who looks at the data and the information. We don't have some fancy AI in the background. They're looking at data. They're looking at reports. We're always constantly trying to review which litter bins are the hot spots. I think one of the questions was about green sacks. About how do we ensure that green sacks don't become fly tipping hotspots. So we're moving them as quickly as possible. We've reduced the pickup points. We're probably going to reduce the pickup points again. We have dedicated marks on their street cleansing schedules where they can actually just pick up. I think there's been some improvement in green bags. The work again is not complete. There's some crews at weekends, particularly on the Saturday and Sunday afternoon. I think there's work to be done, but we should only be doing they should only be doing commercial streets over the weekend and dealing with the town centres. So that's just a very quick run through of some of the points.
Okay, so we'll go to Councillor Pritchard, then Councillor Fairclough, and then Councillor Holden and Councillor Lister.
Thank you. To be clear, I accept that recycling is improving, I accept that the bin collection is improving, and I accept that it needs to be done fortnightly. I even accept that the fly tipping has increased nationally and at an unprecedented and unforeseeable scale. But what I can't accept is that this contract was ever fit for purpose, and what none of us can accept is how filthy our streets are. Now, what concerns me is, you touched on it earlier, the pitch and ditch practice of Veola, where it sent a bunch of people coming in to sell this contract, to underbid for it, with no operational expertise, and you yourself admitted that it now needs to meet more resources. This unrealistic sort of underbidding has resulted in a fraction of street sweepers being employed compared to what were previously employed, and this has resulted in filthy streets, as we've heard clearly. On our side of the house, we seem to accept this optimism, right? And we've simultaneously accepted the risk that goes with outsourcing. Yet simultaneously under-resourcing the monitoring aspect, a failure to ensure sufficient aspects within the contract, and also cutting the number of staff in our street teams. What I want to know is at a very fundamental level, not about any other aspect of it, but is the street cleaning aspect of this contract fit for purpose? Does it have sufficient resources? Did it ever have sufficient resources allocated to it? And if not, as I suspect not, what's going to happen about it?
I don't necessarily agree with the pitch and ditch philosophy, the statement. There has been a lot of movement, and there maybe some of the due diligence wasn't as good as possible, and some of the information, and we can only resource according to the information we have available to us. And I never expected we talked about Graveney, Links and Sealy, pre-Veolia had a daily collection of flight tips. We can't afford to run a vehicle through there because we don't have that level of resource. We certainly have more resource on mechanical sweeping than you've ever had on this area. The cage vehicles are probably where we've most had the issues because they respond to the fly tipping. So our mobile response teams, in the bid I had 4. I'm now running 7, currently at Veolia's cost. This contract financially doesn't make any sense for Veolia from the street cleansing perspective. I think that the optimism based around I think parts of the borough have responded well to the having a black bag weekly methodology. It's the dark ages in waste management, to be completely frank, and anyone that thinks so really shouldn't be involved in the industry. So that we've seen the recycling rates, we've seen some positives, but we haven't seen on some parts of the borough, particularly Mitcham, where we haven't seen the benefits of that containerised solution because we're still seeing too much site waste. So there's work to be done. That wasn't foreseen by the bid team, and there's some coming in operationally. I've had it reviewed, not by myself, but we've had many independent people from Veolia come and look at the resources. And they say the resources are about right when we get everything as lined up as it should be. Now that's going to take some time. So I'm not. I think some things have worked really well. I mean, Hillcross is a perfect, Garth Road, perfect examples of how containerisation. It's on the way here from Garth Road. I work in Garth Road. I'm here every day. Garth Road is like a different place to when I first come. Hillcross is a big through route. It was a disgrace because after the collection service, and that took up all your street cleansing resource to go and deal with that immediately after the collection. Now it doesn't need that after the collection service. So there is parts that it's worked really well. I acknowledge there's parts that it's not quite there, and we need to then do changes and make differences.
You said 4. You said a bid for 4. It's increased to 7. What's the number that will keep our streets clean?
It's not about the cage vehicles respond to the fly tips. We're responding to the fly tips really well. We respond to those. I think you sort of maybe mixes of. Sorry,
if that's not what you're
I think there is certainly some work we're doing with the local authority to look at where we need to address We only have made some conservation. We will put some more resources in. But we also need, we're looking at an arrangement with the boroughs.
Okay, I'm going to go to Councillor Fairclough and then Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to come back, if I might, to systems that learn. The first point being, we've got 3 years of data on street cleaning, and you obviously have regular client meetings. Nothing seems to be happening, so what is going to make a difference now, and why has nothing happened over the last 3 years? Secondly, a lot of what is talked about in the report is responses under the SLA times, to empty clearing overflowing bins, to clear fly tips. In sort of post-austerity kind of era, the earlier operatives are the boots on the ground, and we wondered what else you might be able to do to incentivise your operatives to go above and beyond to help report fly tips when they're out and about, to report miscollection, that kind of thing. I appreciate that's outside the contract, but it's part and parcel of doing the job, and you are the people on the ground.
Many of the staff care passionately, and the management team that have come in, you probably see from some of my responses, we care passionately about what we do. And coming here and facing lots of criticism when we've been on an incredible journey with what we've delivered, it is really challenging. But many of the front line, I can tell you, will report, particularly many of the ex-Merton staff, report more fly tips and that said this needs attention, that needs attention. There's already that culture. Probably not formalised. It's dealt with at a local level. We're looking at more supervision in the Mitcham area because actually then taking that information and getting that passed across, because they are the eyes and ears. And we probably haven't capitalised on that enough. But there is already a lot of information that's being passed, and you're absolutely right, the frontline staff are excellent. There's been some examples of not, but there's many excellent frontline staff, and I support them to, I'm their manager and I'm responsible for them. And I've been delighted with some of their responses to the work. But there is always more, it's constantly evolving. I do think that the service has evolved from a street cleansing perspective. I can remember the first scrutiny meeting, which I can tell you wasn't very pleasant, which was about 2 weeks into the service, when we were completely underprepared. And that was because we based it on a change in service later on. So we had to do quite a lot of work quickly. But the service now, I do see lots of streets have improved, but there are still lots of work that requires to be done in the West.
So Councillor Holden and then Councillor Sample.
Yeah, so my point's more about how you choose to do street sweeping and when, because one of the things we notice in particular is certain roads do get swept and cleaned, but only after a lot of jumping up and down by the residents or residents associations or the ward councillors. And then other roads, which don't complain, probably don't get swept in years. So how do you actually ensure street sweeping across all the roads and not just those who shout loudest? And part of the second part of that is when you do go to those roads, quite more often than not, there's no monitoring of the outcome of the street sweep. So it's claimed to have been done, but we go back and have a look, and the gutters are still blocked. There's litter still there, sometimes just yards away, and apparently the street sweep has been, but for whatever reason they've not actually done the job. So how do you actually then monitor when they have been?
The monitoring is performed. We have 2 environmental managers that were originally scheduled in the contract. We've also increased 1 foreman already, and we're going to add probably another foreman to improve the supervision. You have 2 foremen, 1 in each area reporting into each environmental manager. We've got the area divided effectively in half, the 2 boroughs. So then on top of that, you've got a contract manager who's then out and about, responsible for the streets. They are responsible for the streets in Sutton and in Merton. So, and on top of that, there is regular drive rounds and checks where then we are monitoring the staff themselves. There is more checks that need to be done to be completed, because I think there are some staff that sent and maybe have done half a job, and that's where we need to address. There is yeah, I'm sure I've seen some myself. We're well aware of that, and that isn't what we're here to deliver, and that will be addressed. If you can give me some examples, all the better. We're well aware of some examples where crews or sweepers have told us they've cleared streets and they haven't.
Councillor Sample.
Thank you. And yes, thank you. My query is about public rights of way, and thank you very much for taking notice of these points at such late notice. I was going to say I'm fortunate, but perhaps that's not quite the right word. I have an awful lot of ancient public rights of way in Figs Marsh Ward. And when Viola initially took over the street cleaning and fire cooking contract, they didn't touch any of the public rights of way in the ward at all. Well, I'm talking specifically about Figs Marsh at the moment, obviously, but I'm aware that there's happening elsewhere. So I queried this to be told, no, it's not Viola's responsibility because they're private property, they're privately owned. I got back to them with proof that in fact they were on Merton's highways hierarchy, so they were definitely Viola's responsibility too. And I was told that no, they still couldn't do it because it hadn't been included in the initial contract. So after a long time, a lot of work by the NCO monitoring officers, I have to say here, they finally got it to cleanse them once a month. Now, this is totally inadequate because I sent you a list of 8 public rights of way that I've got on Big Marsh. And one of them, which is said to me to be the worst public right of way in the borough, needs cleansing at least, well, every couple of days, let alone once a month. It's totally inadequate. So what I'd like to know is, when are we going to have proper, adequate cleaning of the public right of way in Big Marsh? If possible.
That's probably one for me to answer, to be fair, Geraldine.
Right.
And the public rights of way are an area of disagreement about what's in the contract and what Veolia's responsibilities are. And until that's resolved, we're paying Veolia on an ad hoc basis to clean them. And if the frequency is not adequate, then we'll have to increase the frequency. But if a public right of way needs cleaning every 2 days, it does suggest to me that there's something wrong in terms of the those who use that public right of way. And that is not uncommon across a number of our areas of the borough and requires our attention and the attention of our contractor Kingdom to deal with the littering and the fly tipping of waste, which despoils those areas and requires that input of resource that we can spend elsewhere. But in the short term, if it needs more frequent cleaning, we'll do that. But it's probably an area that we need Pat de Jesus and the enforcement team to look at in order to address the problems that are occurring.
Okay, we'll move on to Councillor Fraser and then Councillor Munn to close.
Thanks, Chair. These are actually 3 areas in Long Thornton.
Sorry, can we keep the question quite quick? Can we keep the question quite succinct? That's all right, thank you.
They're linked actually. 3 areas that I believe could be dealt with better. I listened to Chris talking, and strategies are there, but they're not being implemented properly. For example, the board sweeping and cleaning. I asked for rotas, and I'm well used to knowing what rotas look like. And I got some things, and I thought, oh, that looks quite good, but it was for the whole borough. So I cut out the bits that I needed and did letters and sent them on. But they don't apply. The dates are there, but nobody actually used those dates. So there's no road sweeping, Thursdays every fortnight or every month, but that's not true. Mechanical sweepers, they do go down the middle of the roads, which doesn't need cleaning at all. And I don't know why. Every time I look, I thought, why are you really just leaving a watermark along the middle? They need to be either got rid of or told how to do it. And the pavements and the gutters are not being cleaned. And that's part of the reason why if we ever have a storm, we will know about it. So I want to know what we're going to do, please.
The rotas provided, we're actually got plans to publish all the rotas. Is something we've been in discussion around to ensure that all of them, the rotas. And then actually that would be more to hold us to account. I have no issue with the rotas being, and the schedules and frequencies of the scheduled collection, street cleansing. So hopefully that will be forthcoming. Mechanical down the middle of the road, completely unacceptable. They may be, I can't get I actually know the small mechanical sweeper from your area. He's actually very capable individual, he's very responsive. So I will question them why they're driving down the middle of the road. Perhaps if it was with the question done or not, we do have GPS. They may have just been returning somewhere, but the staff actually that drive that equipment I'm very comfortable with. The pavements and gutters is the focus, absolutely focus. We've taken off one of the questions of what we're doing, what we learn. We've learned that actually we've removed litter pickers. We've taken away. We want people to sweep, not to just walk around. There was a big momentum to just literally litter pick because that's what they did previously, because of the old style bag solution. Now we want them to sweep. It's a change. It is a challenge for some. So that is we're there to address the pavement and gutters and deal with the detritus. It's something John and I and Charlie have been working on, and we have some ideas to how to tackle that.
Thank you. So, Councillor Munn, please keep it with.
Thank you, Chair. At a previous committee, you gave a figure of 4,800 reports of fly tipping by Veolia staff. I'm just wondering, have you got an update on that? And also, what's your view on the scale of fly tipping? At the minute, it seems that
a lot of emphasis has been placed on residents. In my opinion, there's only so many fridge freezers you can dispose of. Is it industrial scale? Is it organised?
I don't think it's... Fly tipping is two things. We've got an abandoned waste problem. We haven't got a fly tipping problem. Let's be clear. It's abandoned bags. It's people that I think in a lot of cases, we're not, if we talk about Kenley Road, which is just around the corner, at the corner of those, that's fly tipping, where people are bringing out boxes. We see it on, you all know I look at Buckingham every single night before I go to bed and listen to the points and we respond. But I look at that and I get really frustrated. But they're also clever enough to not leave any evidence for the enforcement team. That's fly tipping. The abandoned bags is about education. And I do believe that. We drove on our tour, we drove down Havens Road. Thursday evening is the collection time, and yet the bags are there Friday lunchtime. Not because we haven't sent a crew through, it's because they've come out and they expect a daily collection. So and the problem is we're satisfying it at the moment, and we're doing 14 collections. So we're doing it, we are going every. So there's some ideas that have come out that are around time plates and giving people more education and making it clear. There's some places around Mitcham High Street that I know every single day I'm going to get bags that have nothing to do with commercial businesses, that people just feel they can bring because the service has been designed around that. We need to design it out. That takes time, that's a journey, and it will be a challenge, and there'll be some people that will be upset about that. But to get control of the street, that's unfortunately the action. In my view, maybe some of my colleagues, we think there needs to be taken.
Okay, so we're going to move on now to communication and reporting. I think what we'll do is just go straight into the kind of follow-up type question situation because we're running out of time. So who would like to go first? Councillor Holden, who next? And then Councillor Muller.
Thank you. When it comes to reporting, it's a big problem. So I'll ask the question that I asked last time and the time before. Is for Veolia Twitter the new and best mechanism to actually get things done? Because for residents, they struggle to actually use the council's preferred mechanisms.
By using Twitter, you are taking resource away from the contract. Let's be clear. You're taking resource, it's a back office process that has to be adopted that people have to follow. I would rather not have Yasmin and Jez and all these people in the back office responding to your social media. Use the council system and I will have more resources to deploy on the frontline services.
You need to talk to them to make it work. We only need to make sure the council's systems work. I tell my residents all the time, please use the call centre, please use the website. I do all what I'm supposed to do, but out of frustration, as a last resort, then I do recommend either the Little Clean Streets app, that's not really recommended, or Twitter, which I don't want to do, but it's a last resort, and until it's not really a Veolia problem, this is more a council problem. So my anger is more aimed at the council to fix the systems, and then it can work better.
Okay, so Councillor Mundy's next.
Thank you, Chair. So casting our mind back to February 2018, Chris outlined that while there is no plan for the council to develop its own app, mobile versions of the council website is being developed, and with features and mapping tools to integrate into Echo, and also referenced about the use of the Love Streets Clean app, which at the time used, correct me if I'm wrong, it was a manual data process because it triggered an email, there was no integration there. So what progress since then has been made? Because it seems there's a lot of manual process in this, and how does it actually get to, Scott, how does it actually get to your guys on the ground in real time? So from the residents' perspective, they're not seeing carry police amounts of Twitter images of split bags.
So I think also Chris needs to come in on that as well.
Shall I start, Chair?
Yeah.
So, first thing to say is that Echo and the council CRM system are fully integrated, and that is by far and away the best way to report a service failure. I suppose that point is worth making, that the system is really only there for service failure, for missed bins, for litter bins that are overflowing. So in an ideal world, when the contract's working well and when the borough's working well, we won't need to rely upon this as much as we do now. And it's a huge source of frustration. The system isn't controlled by me or my department. That's not an excuse, but it is a system that works for the whole council, and therefore it's being adapted and used for the purposes of pushing information down a pipe into Veolia's system, and that works well. As I say, the best method and the quickest method is to use the council's interface, but we still allow reports to come through Love Twin Streets, Fix My Streets and any other proprietary app. But that means that it does have to be double-handled. Somebody has to take it off, put it into the council system and then send it over to CRM, and when, over to Echo, and then when it comes back, it doesn't automatically go back to the user on their mobile phone. The council CRM system has had problems. I know they're well reported elsewhere in other panels, and the council is moving to Microsoft 365 later this year, which will be another change, and we'll have to freeze all further enhancements to the website and to the CRM improvements that we're making whilst that process is undertaken. But we still aim to make it more user-friendly and to add more functionality, and particularly to allow an account. I know this is the intention of corporate services, to allow for an account to be provided, so it reduces the need for double entry and constantly having to put your own information in on a regular basis when you want to report. And I can understand that's not where we want to be.
A slight follow-up on it before, Scott, you touched on that point. I mean, I have personally noticed an improvement in the council site, but one bugbear of mine is when I'm out and about, I can't upload images because of the capacity restriction. Will we be lifting that capacity restriction before the move to 365? Because it's challenging probably for the guys on the ground to know what they're picking up without that imaging.
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know what you mean.
I think we would want to investigate that, but it's looking at the technical limitations within the current system in preparation to the move to 365. I'm meeting with the team on Friday, and we're going to undertake a visit to a neighbouring authority who also has a relationship with Veolia and uses the Microsoft CRM system to look at possible improvements that we can make in both uploading the systems and also having traceability within the transaction in CRM to inform customers better through that journey. And that's something that I've developed in my previous role, and I'd like to bring that business intelligence sector to my new opportunity here.
Just to confirm, absolutely, the CRM system is integrated with our Echo solution. The real time, we have if anyone would like to come and visit us, anybody, you're welcome. And you can come and look at the wall, and you can look at, we've got a screen up there with the real time jobs coming in. You'd be more than welcome to come and see what we do with our systems. The door is open. If you only want to come for a cup of tea, and I don't mean anybody, you're more than welcome to come and have a look. It's not the most interesting sites. I'm directly opposite the Household Waste Recycling Centre, but you can see it in action. And you can even load a job if you wanted to and watch it come through and come to one of our tablets, just to demonstrate it as well. More than welcome.
I would like to add one final thing is we will be undertaking some quality checks in regards to this. So one of the notes that I've already passed Charlie this evening is that with our neighbourhood contract officers and our new street inspector resource, we will be reviewing all the miscollections for one day post its SLA. And Scott won't know what that day is, and we will undertake a review of all those address locations to ascertain if that work was undertaken for miscollections. And then we'll do it reflectively. I want to take stock and to see, it goes through the system, and we talk about system integrations, but actually what happens on the street. So, and what happens on the street is what residents care about. I start at that principle and then work it back through the system to try to see where the errors may be.
Thank you, Chair. Coming back on that point, starting with residents, I think one of the issues that my residents regularly raise is that they report things on the council's website. They don't know or they don't care whether that's a Veolia responsibility, whether it's a Verdi's responsibility, whether it's a Veolia commercial, whether it's private land. If it falls outside of the Veolia responsibility, reporting through the council system doesn't result in anything happening. They don't even get a response. And I think some of that customer service principle is, sorry, that's public land, that's private land, and this is what we can do with private land. We can't do that. You shouldn't have to know the email address for Verdi, a different email address for Veolia Commercial, report it online for Veolia. You have to be an expert to get anywhere.
One of the goals this Friday in our inspection is to look at feedback mechanisms. I looked at a case that I noticed on a public rights of way with a flagship at that location. I saw it on a Twitter account, and I personally went and looked at it, and then I investigated it in the CRM system, and it said the job was complete. And I said, it isn't complete because it's right there, and here's the picture on my phone. And in the inquiry looking into it, the job had been canceled, and the canceled job related to complete. What that needs to do is trigger if the job is to be canceled, it needs to go to my client team to approve that cancellation. I need to build in that intricacy within the system, which will allow us to give us that confidence. And so if it is on private land, the job therefore isn't a Veolia responsibility, the job is then canceled. It comes to our client team so we can then inform the customer of what the action is. And that closes that loop.
Okay, and the final question from Councillor Lee.
Yeah, now the council have statutory duties across a lot of this, and the residents are here to be served, quite frankly, and it isn't the job of residents to constantly talk to the council about fly tipping, all the contractors about fly tipping, and be asked a series of questions. And there are not just statutory responsibilities, there are contractual responsibilities. And regardless of the fact that we talk about fly tips being removed within 24 hours, it's 24 hours of being notified. The fact is they hang around for a lot longer. And it's the attitude that needs to change. I mean, in the numbers here, the recycling objective has been missed again. I assume that's the 111th month in a row. The attitude needs to change. You're not hitting your recycling targets. You are not cleaning the streets, you are not delivering on your statutory duty, you are not being transparent. We want you to understand you work for the residents. You do not tell residents what to do. And we want clean streets, we want waste collected, we do not want piles of smelly stuff, doesn't matter. We do not want piles of smelly stuff in our houses and have to deal with a council that is frankly not interested in delivering a service. So I'd like a different attitude, and actually, I'd like facts. We are missing our recycling target, are the words I want to hear, not we're doing well. Don't have targets. Don't stand up in council and brag if you're not going to achieve it, because I, for one, will not sit back and listen to people saying things and not delivering them. So that is my point. Hopefully, somebody will take that away and change their attitude.
I just had one final question about Love Clean Streets. We're saying we're still manually entering things like, now, is there any scope to put any investment in integrating that? Because obviously that as an app solves a lot of problems for our residents in that it's very easy to use
And it's a one-size-fits-all thing.
I think we need to look at the multiple channels that we can possibly utilize apps. But before that, we need to establish the new CRM system, because any integration that happens right now would have to be reintegrated when we put a new CRM system. So we have to wait for that moment in time before we then invest in a secondary technology to report into the primary unit. Love Clean Streets is really good. Fix My Street is very good and have a lot of work. And there's also secondary applications, and there's the possible development of our own app that sits on a Microsoft Dynamics platform. So we need to then look at those programs. I've been doing some work with the cabinet member in terms of a Cleaner Merton program, and one of our tranches of work is information technology. And this will be a project that will feed into the overall program of how we deliver improvements in reporting.
Okay, so I think it's time we move to some recommendations. Does anybody want to say something? No? Councillor Murray.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, clearly we've heard that the estates are a particular challenge compared to the rest of the borough, so perhaps particularly focus on the estates and some additional sort of plan there, because there need to be some, admittedly we want to have a contract which is as standard across the board as possible, but these areas are not standard, they're different, they're unique. So within reason, how can that be applied? So that may be one possible recommendation.
I'd like to see deep cleans done in specific areas. I think there is, quite obviously, there's certainly, I know you've got your good stories, right? That's great, but I live in Mitcham and there's not many there, okay? So there's certain wards where there are no good stories, right? And they're the wards that need deep cleans. And I know you say, you know, you're sweet, you don't pick. That's great. But if it's not working, the litter's still there. It's just still there, mate. Alright? So let's just get those places cleaner and deep clean certain streets, street by street, and know what we're doing, and tell people where we're going to deep clean. Alright? So that they know it's happening, you know, informing them, manage their expectations, and hell, get them involved. You know what I mean? You know, we shouldn't rely on them, but I know a lot of our residents are incredibly active and will, you know, follow on and or help in some ways. So please, just do a deep clean, forecast and manage it.
We heard earlier on about an improvement plan, and I wonder if we could have more detail on the improvement plan, specifically with reference to the bin collection and the street cleaning, as a recommendation for the future.
Okay, appears to stop working. My key concern is consultation, making sure it works for residents. So if there's any aspect of educating the public, I think we should have a recommendation that we need to reach out to residents, associations and groups in particular, and sort of other community groups who are interested in this matter, leverage them to actually get the word out to help improve street scene matters. Thank you, Chair. While I wouldn't, I know that the Cabinet Office and GDS move away from saying an app is the answer to everything, but I'm actually interested in data integration and moving on from moving to the platform like the 365 CRM is really, really interesting and exciting. So perhaps a strain of work on what services can we integrate and how do we look at that user journey and show it to the committee as well.
Okay. So we've got large estates and we've got smaller flats where there's an issue. So we'll make a recommendation that we should work up specific plans about what we're doing about the large estates. So if every large estate in this borough had a plan, and that plan included an engagement event, follow-up enforcement and door knocking, and if you are doing any of that work anyway, can we be involved in that and be at the table when we're having those discussions? We would like to get a proper clear idea of what these web improvements are, and maybe some input into what they are, and kind of just looking at the guise of just how a resident would use them, because we don't want these created in isolation, so that they actually help people rather than just thrust upon our residents and told to deal with them. I think something that's come out constantly, especially around the bin collection, is communication. So we launched this new service, and yes, it is working for people with their own front doors in large, but in other areas it isn't. So we launched it and then we didn't follow up with any other messaging. And you can't change behaviour that quickly with one message. We need to develop a kind of always-on approach to our comms. So something that is constantly talking about why we recycle, how we recycle, when you recycle, when your collection is, and that's all underpinned by how and the reporting functionality that the website has. So we would like that maybe put into, so when you get a council tax statement, maybe you're reminded about what your collection is in your area, put it into My Merton, all the social communication channels that the council has, there should be constant presence there. And maybe the idea of, if you're a new resident to the borough, maybe we create a web page that is welcome to Merton, this is your ward, this is your collection day, this is how you should present your waste. We want the ward by ward cleaning, deep cleaning, especially starting in the areas where it hasn't been touched. I mean, I live in Mitcham too, and I can tell you now there are definitely areas that someone has picked up a Coke can, but they haven't swept my street. They have not swept my street. And it doesn't matter how many times you report it, no one is coming to sweep it. We know that there's been some improvement notices put on the street cleaning, and then Veolia has to come up with an improvement plan. We want to see the improvement plan. We want to understand what's in it, and we want to have an opportunity to scrutinise it and help shape it, or understand at least what's going on in there. So that's one of our recommendations. And finally, you're going to have to come back here and talk about it again in 6 months, because we want to know what's going on. We can't. There needs to be a point where we say enough is enough. We can't continue to have, because the report we had for this meeting was very similar to the report we had for the last meeting and the one before that. So things need to start changing because there isn't any more patience or goodwill. So sorry.
Can I just add something? Sorry. Is it working now? Right. As Chris was saying earlier, we need to be liaising more with the Kingdom Security Team. As far as the public rights of way are concerned, it is true. I know the waste enforcement team are working their socks off to sort things out in the PRWs, but also they haven't got enough resources to cover it. And it's very true that the Kingdom Security people, who I have to say I haven't ever seen in Mitcham, I don't think anyone else has. Well, they're not terribly visible, but we really do need to have them on board so that people can be.
So what's the recommendation?
To have more liaison for Veolia and the waste enforcement team to have more liaison with Kingdom Security.
Okay.
Regarding the serving penalty fines for people who are literally in fines.
Okay. Well, should we go on to vote on those recommendations then? Is everybody in agreement with those recommendations? Yeah? Yeah? Everyone happy? Okay, so that brings us at the end of item 4, the marathon that is continue to carry on, and I'll see you all again soon, no doubt. Please get home safely, and if anyone needs a comfort break, please take it now.
What then it creates a system of
Okay, should we carry on now then? Okay, everybody? Right, so next is item 6, the flight tipping strategy. I'm going to hand over to John to introduce it, or to Tobin? To John, okay. Here you go.
Thank you very much, sir. I just need to flip to the correct page. Essentially, we've developed a flight tipping strategy to help focus our attention in delivering improvements in flight tipping to correspond with the rise in flight tipping and to better coordinate our resources internally to get the best possible outcomes. As 2.2, we have developed a Cleaner Merton program, which will, and I can pass this information around the table. Which will underpin the delivery of several different projects of work to look at making improvements in our objective to provide a cleaner Merton. One of these is a flight tipping strategy, but underpinning the flight tipping strategy, which is most important, is the vehicle that gets us there, is the flight tipping action plan. It is proposed within the report that we have a series of consultations with local members in October to feed into the current draft action plan, to listen to local options on how we best tackle fly tipping. It's important to note that the fly tipping from both the observations and the tonnage information, the collection information that we've received We don't have the organised elements in this associated with fly tipping to a greater degree. It's more of opportunistic fly tipping, which occurs with smaller levels, black bags, single occurrences, which can be combated through, over time, through education. And we don't have such a large requirement for target hardening and things like that. But we still have that aspect within the fly tipping, provisional fly tipping plan through our allocating scheme as well. So I could welcome your observations and comments to the draft strategy.
Okay, any questions? Councillor
No, thanks, John, for that. I understand, so thank you for outlining as you've done, and for us, I'm a big supporter on sort of data approach and user journey approach you're adopting. However, it would imply that it's not being done already, and in a sense, how do you, so I appreciate the observation example versus the data example, but these are the same streets over again who have sofas and things like this, they're not just waste bags. So how do we know that it is one thing when it could be the other without looking at the data?
It's not that it hasn't been done. It's how it is pulled together and coordinated to get better outcomes. So, for example, within the fly tipping draft strategy, there is a picture of a fly tipping hotspot on page 45 of the report, section 6, where these fly tips. That comes from our current data. So we have, we're able to heat map where our fly tipping locations are. We have that intelligence. It's how we coordinate that data then to inform where our communication plan goes, where our education goes, how do we then coordinate that with our Kingdom security provider to see if we can improve proactive enforcement activities. So it's how we then take it to the next level to get better outcomes. And instead of working in silos, it's how we then bring that across to one overarching program to feed into that program board to ensure we have that transparency across those different elements of work to lead to that. So it's not that it's absent.
Thank you, and thank you, John. You talk about a revised specification for the services that Kingdom currently provide. Can you talk in more detail about the revisions there?
Let me hand this over to Charlie because he's working on this at the minute.
So our contract with Kingdom was secured 4 years ago when we were in a very different place, where the number one concern was street litter, and the contract was designed purely to focus on residents, visitors in the borough that were littering. The climate in which we operate now has changed, and March of next year our contract with Kingdom actually expires. It's a 4-year contract, and we've already used the extension. So we're currently putting together for our procurement board our procurement strategy to expand the remit of what we would refer to as our environmental enforcement contract. So though it's commonly known as Kingdom, there's no guarantee that Kingdom will be the successful bidder. 4 years ago there was only 2 major players in the industry, where there's at least 4 if not 6 players, and it's becoming quite a competitive industry. So we're confident that we'll be able to secure a new provider for our litter enforcement. But within that contract, which is beneficial, it's a concession contract where we receive the revenue from those FPNs. It's cost neutral, but actually does generate an excess revenue back into the authority to invest back into the street scene. But we are looking at expanding that remit to look at how we do enforcement for abandoned waste, as Scott Agent would refer to it as, and to support our other service providers in managing not only enforcement activities, but recent events such as the festival, the music festivals. Can our enforcement contractors be used to go into our parks, to really just broaden the scope that the new contract will provide?
So it sounds like there's also a slight issue with capacity, because obviously you can't be everywhere every time someone's doing something. What opportunities have been presented with training up, say, staff on housing associations, those in police estates, to support the process?
Certainly, we've actively engaged with the police and the local community residents associations. We've done a number of toolbox talks. We've done the art contractors with the caretakers on the house, particularly to look at antisocial behaviour, particularly around knife crime. That again is an area of scope that we can invite the new contractor to start policing, to start working with our Safer Merton teams to look at those hotspots and work outside of the normal conventional 9 to 5, Monday to Friday working hours.
I think to also pivot back to fly tipping, one of the elements that we need to work on, and hopefully, your response to the forthcoming engagement with the action plan will be helpful, is how do we look at the possibility of utilizing our street champions and people who work within our housing associations to be our eyes and ears out there if they want to contribute, and to utilize them and maybe provide training or something like that, which will allow the weight of their evidence in a court proceeding to hold that weight. And if you follow that through to the development days that we offer the magistrates court, where we can speak to the clerk and inform them of this activity. So when he goes to court, if it does go to court, their information has a certain weight to it, as an officer's information would have if we observe something, to include them more in the enforcement journey. I think it's also important with the forthcoming enforcement contract. The way we're looking at it is to keep the current operation that Kingdom utilized is a core. That is a core aspect of the service that we don't want to tamper with. And we want to look at maybe different schedules or different lots of a new provision to see if we can develop new work. So looking at the low-level fly tipping that you see if you drive down St. Helier Avenue, which I do every day. And I actually stopped and caught somebody the Friday before the bank holiday because well, and
there was always somebody doing something.
And I knew it was clean, and I knew it was new, but using that logic, we want to engage with the marketplace by having an open day for the marketplace to talk through that, to say, we have this many incidents, here's the locations of these incidents, there's a potential there to look at issuing fixed penalty notes for that, to hopefully look at that. So these are some of the things that we want to connect the dots with our enforcement contract that will feed into our fly tipping action plan, as well as education. So when we do a deep clean in St. Helier Avenue, we have promotional leaflets that we've developed to stick through the door, which says, by the way, don't stick your bags of waste here on these green open spaces because it's not allowed. It's how we join these dots together.
I think really no one's mentioned the fact that nobody talks to fly tippers. Nobody talks to them. And if you talk to fly tippers, they'll tell you two things. One, the council used to have more than one recycling centre. And two, it never used to be too expensive.
Fly tipping is illegal. It's a criminal offence. So
And councils have a statutory duty to collect waste from households.
We have a statutory duty under Section 45 of the EPA to collect waste from the household.
Correct.
We have a statutory duty under Section 89 of the EPA to clean public lands.
Correct.
However, fly tipping is a criminal offence.
So we can ignore that. If you don't want to talk to them, that's fine. But I'm saying to you, when may I finish? I listened very patiently to.
Let the council team finish his question and then you can.
Yeah, well, it's a statement really. So there are two reasons that they fly tip. One is because there used to be two recycling centres, now there's one. And there is nowhere for them to go cost effectively to put their fly tip. So they take the easy option. It's very easy for us to say it's wrong. If you go to Naples, it's wrong, but Naples is full of fly tips. And the problem is that no one has actually said to these people, how can we solve this issue? It's always about how can we fine you. And these people are criminals, so they're not going to say, well, I'll tell you what, it's fair cop, I'll stop doing it. Clearly they know, because I've got figures here. They don't stop doing it. We have to make it easier for waste to be collected. Because if you look at what that waste is, all of it at some stage will go in the waste stream. It is better to do it in a legal manner than an illegal one. And I think you should start talking to fly tippers about that to find out. I mean, there are the two areas. There's the inscrutable people, and then there's like the one person in my street whose waste wasn't picked up this morning. That's tomorrow's fly tip. And the council needs to pick up that waste rather than have tomorrow's fly tip. Because now I'm going to be bored tomorrow at 9 AM phoning the waste line to get that picked up when it could have been picked up today with the waste. There's a different attitude required. Statutory duties, and if you don't find them and fine them, they're going to fly tip. And at the moment, it's not working, and it has to start working. And removing Kingdom and putting someone else in, they'll have the same people with the same strategy and will have the same arguments. And frankly, you want success, not debate.
We're about to get to 10 o'clock, so is everybody happy to carry on until 15:15? Thank you. To sum up then, it's just how we treating fly tippers and actually communicating with them to stop them from doing this and providing cheap, accessible ways for them to dispose of their waste.
I think we should talk to fly tippers.
Yeah, happy to say a few words, John might. So as the fly tipping strategy identifies, there are a number of different types of fly tippers. There's the industrial scale, and there's the abandoned waste. And part of the strategy is about education, and it's about making people aware of how you can dispose of your waste responsibly, and what we'll do if you don't do that. We found no correlation between, for example, the free bulky waste service or a charge for bulky waste service and fly tipping. There's no correlation there at all. The strategy aims to provide the right education, support, advice and guidance to people. But for people who do the wrong thing, we will come down on them and we will take all the action we can under the law. And what the discussion about Kingdom is describing is we are under-resourced in terms of our capacity and culture to deal with that. And we procured Kingdom to assist us with some aspects a few years ago. We're looking now about how they could assist us with a further range of activities in order to save council taxpayers money, but also to continue the delivery of the strategy and enforce more actively.
Thank you, Chair. Sort of relates to what Councillor Dean said, but I was quite pleased to see a sort of brief reference to things like Great British Spring Clean and litter pits. My plea is maybe can we develop that aspect of, if you're talking about education, that aspect of resident involvement in solving the problem, I actually think is a really good thing to do. I think it's a great thing to have people involved in making their areas better. One, it means that they might actually think about, I'm not telling you about rubbish bags here, but also that's about creating a sense of community, so and pride in an area. So can I say thanks very much for mentioning it, but I'd love to see more detail on that.
Okay, thank you. Good reports. Thank you for that, John. There's a lot in here I like. Councillor Dean's on to a good point where we need to find ways to make it easier for people to make the right choice. I think that's what we're trying to do partly in this. But it does have a point that a lot of residents can't actually now get to Garth Road to do the right thing, take things there because they can't use cars because maybe elderly or they live in blocks of flats and can't get cars because the council's own policy is to drive down car ownership and use. So people are struggling to do the right thing. So we need to find a way how local sites or some convenient facility to allow people, let's say, with flats or some inconvenient properties to actually take their waste somewhere appropriate that can then be kept clean entirely, not just flighted or something that drags all the way to the Garth Road.
Thank you, Chair. I think there's lots of possible developments with that. My natural inclinations would be to lead that customer to the bulky waste collection service if you're unable to have a vehicle to collect something. And I know that service has changed over time, but also during that period, I think the third-party sector has also developed. There are many different apps and opportunities for people to look at reusing the materials, or so unwanted goods can be shared amongst the community in many different ways, so they're not seen as wasted. It's not simply, I just don't want this anymore, and we have an obligation to pick it up. It's how we then change through our communication work, how we change that into a possible opportunity for somebody else.
Okay, I'm just going to Councillor Stanford and go to Councillor Byers, and I think we should end there. If that's okay.
Okay, right. I don't think there's anybody here who would remember, although I think probably David was around at the time, when we had the community skips, which were put around the borough, I think 4 times a year, wasn't it? And it was to take all people's sort of bulky waste and build all sorts, well, not building material, but all sorts of bits and pieces that they couldn't get rid of, or they hadn't got the means to get into the tip themselves and that sort of thing. And they were very, very popular. Unfortunately, they were always also very popular with all the developers around the borough, who, as soon as the skips were put out in the street, along they came with all their building materials and filled them up before the residents even had a chance to use them themselves. So we had to withdraw it. Now, I don't know if now that times have changed, and it's a few years back, if there's any way of recreating that kind of scheme to help residents find alternative ways of...
In my experience, no. Times haven't changed, and people will abuse that, and it will cost. And it also sends the wrong message, because what it does is it doesn't promote reuse or recycling, it promotes a throwaway society. And we do need to change that position.
Okay, so I'll end with Councillor Byers.
I just wanted to pick up very briefly on Anthony's point, because we've done a lot of work with Street Champions in Graveney, and we've also got the Community Champions scheme, which Sustainable Merton runs, and which was awarded some SIL funding in the recent round. And we had quite a good meeting a month or so ago with Sustainable Merton to look at how we link the two schemes together. And there's some publicity planned for the autumn to encourage people to get involved. And I think it feeds into some of our other objectives around air quality and environmental measures as well, because Sustainable Merton scheme is a bit wider than just refuse. So I think there is a lot of opportunity there, and we are looking at that.
Okay, so we'll draw that to a close. I just personally like to say thank you for this report. I know this sounds stupid, but I really enjoyed reading it, and I think it was refreshing to see quite a robust, detailed approach to something that is very frustrating to all our residents. So I look forward to seeing how it develops and how we can measure it over time. So we'll move on to item 7, which is performance monitoring. Now, Councillor Butler is unfortunately not here. So, Chris, did you just want to pick out anything, and then I'll move over to the panel see if they want to mention anything?
No particular areas to pick out. There has been an improvement in parts quality management scores, which is on page 59. So the target is to achieve a score of at least 5. I think last year it was bubbling around 4.8. This year it's consistently above 5. So hopefully that's borne out by residents and members' perceptions. And given the time, I'd rather field any questions, Chair.
Any questions?
Nothing I haven't said already about failed recycling levels.
Thank you. Councillor Becker?
I'd like to ask about planning enforcement cases. I know it's an ongoing problem, but I wonder if there's an update.
Yeah. So I've committed to a significant reduction in that backlog by the end of the year, and the action plan to reduce enforcement backlog has been signed off. That includes a mixture of some additional capacity, and one additional planning enforcement officer has already started. Another one is being recruited to. It's a very competitive market, so it's quite hard to get hold of them. And we're also buying in some extra capacity from Capita, who provide a paid-for service. Some of the development control officers are also hosting or holding a planning enforcement day, so we're using that capacity to focus attention in order to clear further cases. The throughput from the existing workforce is about 600 cases per annum, but we do have the backlog of about 400 to 500 cases, about 400 cases. So the intention is to clear through the historic backlog and bring it down to below 100. It's early days yet, and if we retain that capacity, I'm confident it's if those additional planning enforcement officers get lured off elsewhere, there's a gap in the capacity that we have. We might struggle if that happens, but we live in hope.
Councillor Lundy.
Thank you, Chair. Chris, SP025, the debt owed by tenants including businesses. The short and long-term trend show a marginal increase. Is there any, can you comment on that? Or is that just because of market conditions, or is there particular issues with other properties we're holding?
So this is 025?
Yeah.
So the arrow is an improvement. If it's going up, it's an improvement there. So historically our void rate and rent arrears, rent recovery in our property is better than target, and that continues to be the case.
Okay, well if that's it, we'll move on to item 8, which is the work programme, and it's just to note that we've swapped the October and February agendas now, so but we sent an email out about that from LGBs, so everyone's happy. We will close the meeting at 10:10. Thank you all so very much for your contributions. Take care.
Well done. Well done.